Romeo and Juliet existed 200 years before Shakespeare ever wrought them. Real feuding families in Verona. Dante mentioned them. Italian writers told their tragic story. Shakespeare transformed an Italian cautionary tale into transcendent romantic tragedy. The true history is grittier, darker, and more fascinating than you ever imagined.
Welcome to Shakespeare's Satchel. If you enjoy these journeys into the bard's world, please like and subscribe. Where are you listening from tonight? It's the early hours of a brisk morning in 1595, and you find yourself standing on Cheapside, the very heart of London's bustling mercantile life. The first hint of dawn, a bruised purple light, filters through the narrow lanes still cloaked in shadows from the tall timber-framed houses. A faint smell of wood smoke hangs in the crisp air, mingling with the earthy scent of the cobblestones and the distant murmur of the Thames. You hear the deep, resonant tolling of a church bell, perhaps Street Mary Le Beau, announcing matins, the first service of the day, its ancient sound cutting through the quiet. Soon, the street will awaken with the cries of hawkers and the clatter of carts, but for now, London breathes softly. You might think you know the story of Romeo and Juliet intimately, a tale woven from Shakespeare's own singular genius, born entirely from his quill. But tonight, let's peel back the layers of that familiar tragedy, revealing a truth far older and deeply rooted in the sun-drenched, yet often blood-soaked, landscape of medieval Italy. Long before Shakespeare put quill to parchment, the mournful echoes of star-crossed lovers resonated through Italian literature, a tragic novella almost 2 centuries in the making, shaping itself slowly over time. Imagine, if you will, the Verona of the 13th and 14th centuries, a city constantly embroiled in the brutal Guelph-Ghibelline conflicts that tore apart Italian city-states. Here, in the shadow of towering family strongholds, blood feuds were a harsh reality of daily life. Among these warring houses were the Montecchi and the Cappelletti. Yes, the Montagues and Capulets, you know, existed. These were not mere literary inventions but actual aristocratic families, their bitter rivalries so infamous that Dante Alighieri himself immortalized their strife in his Purgatorio, a testament to their very real destructive history. You can almost see their fortified tower houses, symbols of power and defiance, looming over the narrow streets, watchmen scanning for rivals and opportunities for vendetta. Their story, however, evolved beyond historical record. It began as an anonymous oral tradition, a cautionary tale whispered in market squares, about the perils of family vendetta and defying parental will. But it truly began to take literary shape with Italian writers like Luigi da Porto in 1524, whose Historia Novellamente Ritrovata *, a newly found story, was arguably the first to name our lovers Romeo and Julieta, giving flesh and heart to the old legend. Then, Matteo Bandello in 1554 expanded upon it, adding more dramatic flair and details, creating a narrative that was darker and more focused on the grim realities of family honor and marriage politics. These Italian versions paved the way for the tale's eventual journey across the Alps, ultimately finding its way into the hands of a young playwright in London. Close your eyes now, and let the historical echoes of Verona's feuds blend with the gentle tolling of London's dawn bells, connecting 2 worlds through an enduring, timeless tragedy. It's a crisp morning in 1595, and you are stepping from the still cool Cheapside street into the warmth of a merchant's home, perhaps Master Johnson, a haberdasher known for his fine ribbons and laces. The air inside is thick, with the scent of a smouldering hearth, and the faint aroma of cooked grains from the kitchens, where the household staff are already at work. You hear the soft murmur of prayers, as the family gathers for their morning devotions before breaking their fast. Sunlight, still watery and weak, filters through the diamond-paned leaded windows, casting intricate patterns on the wooden floorboards worn smooth by generations of footsteps. You take your place at the long trestle table, the polished wood cool beneath your hand. Before you, a simple breakfast, a trencher. a thick slice of stale bread that serves as your plate, laden with a piece of cheese and perhaps a scrap of cured meat. A tankard of small beer, weak but safer than London's often contaminated water, awaits your lips. This is the daily ritual, the steady rhythm of Elizabethan life. It is in such homes, warmed by the fire and sustained by simple fare, that stories like that of Romeo and Juliet truly took hold, not just on the stage, but in the popular imagination. You might believe that Shakespeare conjured every detail of the star-crossed lovers' tale from his own brilliant mind. Yet, as you consider the morning's quiet, imagine a well-worn chapbook, a small, cheaply printed book, passed from hand to hand. This book, published in 1562, almost certainly found its way into Shakespeare's hands. It was Arthur Brooke's narrative poem, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet. This poem was Shakespeare's most direct and significant source, a bridge connecting the Italian novellas to his English stage. Brooke's version already contained many of the elements you recognize. The two feuding families, the fateful masked ball where Romeo and Juliet first meet, their instant and fervent love, the balcony, or rather the window, scene where they declare their secret affections, their clandestine marriage performed by a sympathetic friar, and the tragic sequence of events involving the potion, the tomb, and their ultimate heartbreaking deaths. The original Italian tales, and Brooke's poem, presented a powerful cautionary lesson, warning against youthful impetuosity, secret alliances, and the disobedience of children to their parents' wishes. It was a story designed to teach, to illustrate the grim consequences of defying societal order and familial expectations. As you finish your breakfast, you realize that while the skeleton of the story was already formed, its deeper meaning, its emotional core still awaited a transformative touch. Brooke's poem, though widely read, was more a moralizing account than a passionate romance. It told the tale, but it did not sing it. That would be Shakespeare's profound contribution. The stage was set, the tragic elements were in place, but the soul-stirring poetry, the incandescent passion that would elevate it to transcendent art, was yet to come. The quiet hum of the merchant's house fades as you reflect on how simple stories, often overlooked, can hold the seeds of immortal tragedies. It's the crisp year of 1595, and you are stepping through the grand arched entrance of London's Guildhall, the very heart of the city's civic and political life. The air inside is cooler, heavier, carrying the faint, aged scent of ancient parchment and polished oak. Sunlight, fractured and pale, struggles to penetrate the high, stained-glass windows, dappling the vast stone floor. You hear the hushed echoes of important conversations, the soft scrape of a clerk's quill, and the distant, measured tread of robed city officials. This is a place where reputations are forged, laws are debated, and the weight of family honor, just as in medieval Verona, holds immense sway over lives. In this time, a father's name was his legacy, and the arrangement of a daughter's marriage was a strategic decision, not a romantic one. You might think that the fiery passion of Romeo and Juliet, their defiant union, was always at the story's core. But the early Italian versions, and even Arthur Brooke's poem, largely presented the tragedy as a warning against youthful disobedience and secret alliances. They focused on the moral lesson, the bitter fruits of defying your parents and challenging established family honor. They were dark tales indeed, but they lacked certain sparks that would ignite them into something transcendent. Now, imagine Shakespeare, with Brooke's poem in hand, sitting by a flickering candlelight, perhaps in his lodgings near the Globe. He saw the potential, the raw human emotions simmering beneath the cautionary tale. He didn't merely adapt, he transmuted. Consider Mercutio, Romeo's flamboyant, cynical, and ultimately doomed friend. He springs entirely from Shakespeare's imagination. His quick wit, his Queen Mab speech, his biting irony. None of this existed before Shakespeare. Mercutio's death too is Shakespeare's invention, a pivotal moment that plunges the play into true tragedy, propelling Romeo toward his fateful revenge. Without Mercutio, the play might remain a sad story. With him, it becomes an unstoppable force. And then there is the nurse, Juliet's earthy, garrulous confidant, whose bawdy humor and deep maternal affection for Juliet are also Shakespeare's brilliant additions. In earlier versions, there was a nurse, but she was a functional character, a messenger. Shakespeare gives her a vibrant personality, making her a living, breathing woman, whose warmth and comic relief provide a striking contrast to the unfolding tragedy, deepening our understanding of Juliet's isolated world. You can almost hear her booming laughter echoing through a Verona courtyard. Perhaps the most significant of Shakespeare's dramatic inventions was the compression of time. The Italian versions and Brooks' poem unfold over several months. Shakespeare, with the genius of a true playwright, condenses the entire whirlwind romance and its tragic conclusion into just 4 intense days. This rapid-fire pacing ignites a sense of urgency and inevitability, making the lovers' choices feel desperate and fate-driven, pulling you into their world with breathtaking speed. It transforms a leisurely narrative into a breathless race against destiny. As you step back out into the bustling street, leaving the solemn Guildhall behind, consider how Shakespeare, by crafting these indelible characters and intensifying the timeline, shifted the story's focus. He lifted it from a mere cautionary tale about defiance to a profound exploration of love, hate, fate, and the brutal consequences of family vendetta. He didn't just tell a story. He made it live and breathe with an emotional intensity that resonates across the centuries. You step into the hushed interior of St. Saviour's Parish Church in 1595, a place of ancient stone and quiet reverence, a familiar landmark for those on Bankside, not far from where Shakespeare himself would one day live, and where his brother Edmund would be laid to rest. The cool air, carrying the faint scent of beeswax and old wood, settles around you. Sunlight, filtered through tall, unadorned windows, casts long, pale streaks across the flagstone floor and the solid oak pews. You hear the distant, muted sounds of London outside, but within these walls, a profound stillness reigns, broken only by the occasional soft rustle of a turning page or a whispered prayer. In this serene space, your thoughts return to the dramatic transformation of Romeo and Juliet. You've seen how the skeletal structure, the historical feud, and many key plot points existed long before Shakespeare. You've also discovered his brilliant inventions, like Mercutio and the nurse, and his compression of the timeline. But what truly elevated this ancient Italian tale from a mere cautionary story to the immortal tragedy we know today? It was Shakespeare's singular genius in shifting its very heart. The earlier Italian versions, and even Brooks' poem, largely presented a moralizing narrative, a warning against youthful impulsiveness, and the grave consequences of defying parental authority in a world where arranged marriages were political and economic necessities. The focus was on family honor and the dangers of secret love. Imagine Friar Lawrence in those earlier tales, a stern figure delivering a sermon on disobedience, rather than a man caught in a desperate attempt to help star-crossed lovers. The original audience was meant to learn a lesson, to be cautious. Shakespeare, however, took this framework and infused it with an overwhelming emphasis on romantic love. He painted Romeo and Juliet's passion as an irresistible, almost spiritual force, a love so pure and powerful it transcends the hate of their families and defies the cruel hand of fate itself. His lyrical language, the breathtaking poetry of their declarations, from the first touch to the final, desperate kiss in the tomb, transforms their suffering into something sublime. The famous balcony scene, for instance, while conceptually present in earlier versions, became a beacon of passionate, poetic devotion under Shakespeare's pen, resonating with a depth of feeling previously unseen. He didn't just tell a story of love, he explored its essence, its power to redeem, and its devastating vulnerability in the face of an unforgiving world. His characters, in their eloquence and emotional depth, transcend the mere roles of disobedient children. They become universal symbols of youthful love, struggling against an entrenched, brutal reality. As you sit in the quiet contemplation of the church, you realize that Shakespeare's true magic lay in this profound reinterpretation. He took a familiar narrative, a historical whisper, and a well-worn cautionary tale, and through the alchemy of his words, breathed into it a transcendent beauty and pathos. He didn't diminish its historical roots. Rather, he honored them by showing how deeply human themes of love, loss, and destiny can emerge from the grittiest realities of the past, echoing still in the stillness of St. Saviour's. It's a brisk afternoon in 1595, and you find yourself standing on a busy London street corner near the Exchange, a hub where merchants conduct their business. The air is alive with a cacophony of sounds, the insistent calls of street hawkers, the rumbling of carts laden with goods, and the quick, sharp chatter of passers-by. The scent of roasted chestnuts mixes with the less pleasant odor of horse droppings and the faint dampness rising from the Thames. Suddenly, you hear a raised voice, a sharp retort, and then the scuffle of boots. A group of apprentices, identifiable by their short cloaks and distinctive haircuts, are squaring off against a rival group. It's not a deadly brawl, but a heated exchange over a perceived slight, perhaps a bump in the street or a mocking word. Honor, even among young men learning their trade, is a volatile currency. You might think that the escalating feuds in Trummer's Romeo and Juliet are purely the stuff of dramatic invention, heightened for the stage. But the truth is, the fierce protectiveness of one's family name and the quick resort to violence over honor were deeply ingrained in Renaissance culture, both in Italy and, to a lesser extent, in Elizabethan London. While London street skirmishes rarely reached the deadly intensity of Verona's blood feuds, the underlying principles of vendetta, the idea that a slight against one member of a family or group was a slight against all, were very real. You can almost feel the tension, the ready hand on a dagger hilt, when a stranger from a rival district or guild speaks an ill word. Shakespeare, a keen observer of human nature and societal norms, understood this implicitly. He didn't invent the concept of family honor leading to street brawls, he masterfully dramatized it. Think of the opening scene of his play, The Capulet Servants, Samson and Gregory, instigating a fight with Montagues simply by biting their thumb, a gesture of contempt. This seemingly minor act quickly escalates, drawing in Benvolio Tybalt, and then the heads of the families themselves. This reflects the very real street corner dynamics you might have witnessed in 1595 London, amplified to the tragic scale of Verona. The Italian literary predecessors like da Porto and Bandello, and Brooke's poem, provided the framework of the feud. But Shakespeare brought it to vivid, dramatic life, showing precisely how easily a casual insult could ignite deadly conflict. He understood that honor was not just an abstract concept for the nobility, it was a visceral, personal matter that dictated behavior, especially among young men. The threat of a duel, a challenge to one's good name, was a constant undercurrent in daily life, shaping social interactions and family loyalties. As the apprentices eventually disperse, their anger simmering but not boiling over into true violence, you consider how these deeply ingrained societal codes of honor and loyalty, whether in Verona or London, inevitably lead to conflict. Shakespeare didn't just tell a story, he revealed the enduring human propensity for both passionate love and destructive pride, a timeless reflection on the delicate balance between personal feeling and the fierce demands of a family name. The crisp air of 1595 hums with a metallic rhythm as you step into a bustling fencing schoolyard, tucked away behind a tavern in Southwark. The rhythmic clang of steel on steel, the sharp exhaled grunts of men in earnest practice, and the barked commands of a fencing master fill the enclosed space. The scent of sweat, damp earth, and faintly oiled leather hangs heavy, distinct from the city's usual odors. Sunlight, filtering through gaps in the surrounding buildings, illuminates dust motes dancing in the air above the packed earth floor, scored with countless boot scuffs and sword marks. Here young gentlemen and even some apprentices learn the art of the rapier and dagger, not just for sport, but for the very real defense of their honor. You watch a pair of gentlemen parry and thrust, their movements precise and swift. This mastery of the blade was a vital skill in Renaissance Europe, where a perceived insult could lead to a challenge, and a challenge to a duel. While Shakespeare's London saw its share of brawls, the Italian city-states that first told the story of Romeo and Juliet were steeped in a far deadlier vendetta culture, Family loyalty was paramount, and blood feuds, like that of the Montecchi and Cappelletti, could fester for generations, leading to swift and brutal acts of retribution. The earlier Italian novellas depicted these acts of violence, the deaths of cousins and friends, as inevitable consequences of the feud, part of the grim cautionary tale. But Shakespeare, with his genius for character and dramatic intensity, didn't just report these acts of violence. He made them deeply personal, turning them into agonizing pivotal moments. He understood that the clashing swords were more than just spectacle. They were the outward manifestation of inner fury and inherited hatred. The death of Mercutio at Tybalt's hand, a direct affront to Romeo's friendship and new family, isn't just a plot device. It's the catastrophic spark that transforms Romeo from a lovesick youth into a man driven by vengeance, shattering the fragile hope of peace. Shakespeare elevates the violence, making it serve the emotional journey, showing its brutal cost not just in lives, but in the spiraling tragedy it unleashes. He reveals how quickly honor can turn to wrath, and wrath to irreversible sorrow. As the ring of steel fades, replaced by the murmur of conversation and the creak of leather, you reflect on how Shakespeare meticulously wove the historical realities of vendetta and the cultural emphasis on honor into the very fabric of his play. He didn't shy away from the gritty truth of the feuds that inspired him. Instead, he painted them with such vivid intensity that the audience feels the weight of every swing of the sword, every challenge to an oath. He showed that from the harsh realities of a feuding world a tale of love could emerge, intensified by the very dangers that sought to extinguish it, making the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet resonate with an enduring power that speaks to the heart, long after the swords have fallen silent. You step into an upstairs sewing room of an Elizabethan home in 1595. A quieter, more private space where the women of the household might pass their afternoons. The air is soft with the scent of dried rose petals and polished wood, a stark contrast to the bustle of the streets below. Pale sunlight streams through a mullioned window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the gentle currents of air, and highlighting the intricate embroidery on a piece of unfinished linen laid across a small table. You hear the faint, rhythmic click of knitting needles perhaps, or the soft rustle of fine fabric as a seamstress works. This is a world of domestic industry and quiet expectations, a stark reminder of the circumscribed lives of women, particularly daughters in this era. You might imagine Juliet as a free-spirited romantic, choosing her own destiny. But in 1595, and certainly in the Renaissance Italy that first conceived her story, a daughter's world was far different. Marriage was rarely a matter of personal affection. It was a political maneuver, an economic alliance, a cornerstone of family honor and advancement. For noble families like the Cappelletti, a marriage was a strategic pact, ensuring land, power, and prestige. A daughter's hand was a valuable asset, to be bestowed where it would best serve the family's interests, not her heart's desires. The early Italian versions of Romeo and Juliet underscore this grim reality. They paint Giulietta's resistance to her parents' wishes as a grave transgression, a moral failing that sets the tragic events in motion. The story served as a cautionary tale, warning young women against the perils of defying their elders and challenging the established social order. Her secret marriage to Romeo was not celebrated as a triumph of love, but condemned as an act of profound disobedience that brought dishonor upon her family. In those darker retellings, the lovers' deaths were the bitter, inevitable consequence of their rash defiance and moral laxity, rather than solely the product of an external, brutal feud. Shakespeare, however, while maintaining the parental pressure for Juliet to marry Paris, profoundly altered the audience's sympathy. He didn't diminish the reality of arranged marriages, but he shifted the emphasis. He made Juliet's dilemma not merely one of disobedience, but one of overwhelming, undeniable love clashing with an unyielding social structure. Her struggle becomes a testament to the power of individual feeling against the cold calculations of family politics. The tragedy, under Shakespeare's hand, emerges not from her moral failing, but from the brutal suppression of a love that is pure, passionate, and ultimately impossible to contain within the confines of a feuding world. As the quiet hum of the sewing room settles, consider how Shakespeare transformed a cautionary tale about duty and honor into a timeless anthem to love, even as it highlights the stark realities of a young woman's choices in a rigid historical world. He reminds us that even within the most constrained lives, the human heart can yearn for a transcendent connection. You step into the steamy warmth of a London laundry house in 1595, a place far removed from the grand stages and ancient battlefields we've explored. The air is thick with the scent of lye, a strong alkali used for washing, and the more pleasant aroma of dried lavender, tucked into linen chests. You hear the rhythmic thwack of wet cloth against a washboard, the slosh of water in large wooden tubs, and the low, companionable chatter of the laundresses. Sunlight, diffused by the humid air, glows softly through the grime-streaked window panes, illuminating rising wisps of steam. Here, humble garments are transformed, cleaned of the day's dirt and grime, much like a timeless story is transformed through the hands of a master storyteller. You've journeyed with me from the grim, feuding streets of medieval Verona, through the moralizing Italian novellas, and across the English Channel to Arthur Brooke's cautionary poem. You've seen how many of the familiar elements, the feuding families, the secret marriage, the potion, the tomb scene, existed long before Shakespeare took up his quill. You've discovered his brilliant additions, the vivid characters of Mercutio and the nurse, and the masterful compression of time that makes the tragedy feel inexorable. Yet his ultimate genius lay not just in adding or subtracting, but in profoundly altering the story's very essence. The original versions of Romeo and Juliet, as we've discussed, were cautionary tales. They presented the lovers' deaths as a direct consequence of their disobedience to parents and their rash, secret actions. The emphasis was on the dangers of defying family honor and social order, a grim warning against youthful folly, in a world where marriage was a strategic alliance, not a romantic ideal. You were meant to learn a lesson, to be wary of such passions. The Italian narratives were darker, more focused on the brutal realities of vendetta, and the severe consequences of straying from your family's path. Shakespeare, however, transformed this moralizing narrative into a transcendent tragedy of romantic love. He took the scaffolding of an old story and infused it with an overwhelming, almost spiritual sense of passion and destiny. His lyrical language, the breathtaking poetry of Romeo and Juliet's declarations, elevate their love beyond mere youthful infatuation. He made their devotion so powerful, so pure that it shines brightly against the backdrop of their family's bitter hatred. The tragedy becomes not a punishment for disobedience, but the heart-wrenching loss of two beautiful souls caught in the relentless grip of fate and an unforgiving world. As the scent of clean linen mingles with the lingering warmth of the laundry house, consider how Shakespeare made their story universal. He transformed a warning into an immortal exploration of love, hate, and destiny, a testament to the human heart's capacity for both profound affection and devastating conflict. He didn't invent Romeo and Juliet, but he made them immortal, forever reminding us that even from the grittiest historical truths, profound art can emerge to speak across centuries. You step into the boisterous warmth of a great manner's kitchen in 1595, a place of organized chaos and delicious aromas. The air is thick with the rich scent of roasting meats, sweet spices like cinnamon and cloves, and the yeasty smell of baking bread. A colossal hearth dominates one wall, its flames dancing, casting flickering light upon bustling cooks and scullery maids. You hear the rhythmic chop of knives on wooden boards, the hiss of fat sizzling in a pan, and the clang of copper pots as they're moved about. This kitchen, much like Lord Capulet's, is a hub of preparation for a grand feast, a place where the ordinary rhythms of life intertwine with the extraordinary demands of noble hospitality, and, sometimes, looming tragedy. You might think that the final devastating moments of Romeo and Juliet, the poison, the dagger, the lovers dying side by side in the tomb, were always imbued with the profound romantic pathos that Shakespeare gives them. Yet, as we trace the story's lineage, you discover that while these physical elements were present in the earlier Italian novellas and Arthur Brooke's poem, their ultimate meaning, their emotional resonance, was quite different. The original endings, dark as they were, leaned heavily into their role as cautionary tales, designed to warn against defiance and secret actions. Imagine the earliest audiences hearing this tale. For them, Romeo and Juliet's deaths were often presented as the just, albeit grim, consequence of their disobedience and rashness, a powerful lesson about the perils of challenging parental authority and social norms. The lovers' tragic demise served to reinforce the era's strict moral codes, where arranged marriages were necessary for family stability and honor, and individual desires were to be subjugated for the greater good of the household. The final scene was meant to leave you with a sense of righteous justice, a dark example of what happens when you stray from the path. But Shakespeare, in his singular genius, transformed this didactic ending. He didn't just present death, he presented a transcendent sacrifice for love. He gave Romeo and Juliet profound, lyrical soliloquies in their final moments, elevating their final acts from mere suicide to a defiant affirmation of their bond. Their decision to die together becomes the ultimate expression of a love that cannot exist in a world consumed by hate. He removes much of the moralizing tone, shifting the focus from the lovers' fault to the tragic circumstances imposed upon them by their feuding families and cruel fate. As the savory scents of the kitchen begin to deepen, signaling the approaching feast, you realize that Shakespeare prepared a different kind of feast for his audience. He took the bitter ingredients of an ancient cautionary tale, and, with the alchemy of his poetry, turned it into a transcendent tragedy. He showed that even in death, love could triumph, not over circumstances, but over the very meaning of suffering, leaving you not just with a warning, but with a profound, aching sense of loss, for a love too pure for its world. You step into a grand hall transformed for a midsummer masque in 1595. The air is warm and heavy, with the mingled scents of beeswax from countless flickering torches, sweet muscatel wine, and the delicate perfume of gentry. Soft, lilting music from a lute and viol drifts through the throng of elegantly masked figures, their rich silks and velvets rustling softly with every graceful movement. Shadows dance on the tapestried walls, creating a world of delightful mystery and concealed identities. You feel the thrill of anonymity, of stepping outside your everyday self, a sense of playful secrecy that, for a fleeting night, allows for a different kind of encounter. It is in such a setting, a masquerade, that Romeo first encounters Juliet, their eyes meeting across a crowded room, their identities hidden, their hearts ignited. This moment, and the ensuing clandestine romance, forms the core of the story you think you know so well. Yet, our journey tonight has revealed how deeply rooted that tale is. Stretching back centuries before Shakespeare's pen touched parchment, you've journeyed from the historical feuds of the Montecchi and Cappelletti in medieval Verona, mentioned by Dante himself, through the dark, cautionary Italian novellas of Luigi da Porto and Matteo Bandello, and finally, to Arthur Brooke's English poem, which provided Shakespeare with his immediate blueprint. Each retelling added a layer, evolving the anonymous folktale into something more refined. But it was Shakespeare, with his unparalleled genius, who performed the ultimate alchemy. He didn't merely repeat the story, he infused it with a breathtaking, transcendent poetry that transformed a moralistic warning into an immortal tragedy of romantic love. He took the existing elements, the feuding families, the secret marriage, the potions, the tomb scene, and elevated them, making them sing with an emotional depth previously unknown. Consider what Shakespeare invented: the vivacious, often bawdy character of the nurse, who grounds Juliet's world in earthy reality; the quick-witted, cynical Mercutio, whose death irrevocably propels Romeo towards tragedy; and the masterful compression of the timeline, turning months into a few desperate, intense days, making fate feel immediate and inescapable. These brilliant additions, combined with his soaring verse, shifted the story's focus from a cautionary tale about disobedience to a profound exploration of love, hate, and destiny. He made the lovers' passions so overwhelming, so undeniable, that their deaths become not merely punishment, but a heart-wrenching sacrifice for a love too pure for their fractured world. As the music continues and the masked figures swirl around you, you realize that Shakespeare's definitive version endures because he tapped into something universal. He showed us that even from the grittiest historical conflicts and the simplest literary forms, True artistic genius can transform raw material into a timeless masterpiece, a story of star-crossed lovers that continues to echo across the centuries, whispering secrets under the torchlight of every generation. You step into the serene, walled herbal gardens of the Blackfriars Monastery in 1595, a tranquil oasis amidst the din of London. The air is cool and fragrant, carrying the distinct, earthy scent of medicinal herbs mingled with damp soil and the distant sweet perfume of blossoming fruit trees. Sunlight filters through the leafy canopy, dappling the gravel paths and illuminating delicate spiderwebs glistening with dew. You hear the gentle hum of bees flitting among the lavender and rosemary, a soothing counterpoint to the faint muffled sounds of the city beyond the high stone walls. Here, in this quiet sanctuary, monks and apothecaries cultivate nature's remedies, exploring the subtle powers of plants to heal or, if misused, to harm. You might assume that Friar Lawrence, the enigmatic figure who secretly marries Romeo and Juliet and concocts the fateful sleeping potion, was a pure invention of Shakespeare's dramatic mind. Yet as you walk these quiet paths, it's revealed that the idea of a compassionate, if misguided friar playing a pivotal role in the lover's tragedy was a long-established part of the story. Both Luigi da Porto's 1524 novella and Arthur Brooke's 1562 poem featured a friar who not only performs the clandestine marriage, but also provides Giulietta with a sleeping draught to escape an unwanted union. This element, the friar's intervention, was a recurring motif in tales of star-crossed lovers, a way to introduce a glimmer of hope, however ill-fated, into their desperate situation. However, Shakespeare, with his profound understanding of human nature and moral complexity, elevated Friar Lawrence beyond a mere plot device. In the earlier versions, the friar's actions were often presented with a more judgmental tone, highlighting the moral ambiguity of his involvement in a deceptive scheme. He was perhaps a symbol of flawed clerical judgment, another element in the cautionary fabric of the tale. But Shakespeare's Friar Lawrence is imbued with a deeper sense of wisdom and burden. You hear him contemplating the dual nature of herbs in his famous soliloquy, that even the sweetest flower can hold poison, and the vilest weed, curative properties. This poetic introspection transforms him into a tragic figure, a man of good intentions caught in a web of circumstances beyond his control, desperately trying to mend the world with his limited powers. As you breathe in the cool herbal air, you sense the quiet desperation of the friar in Shakespeare's hands. His decision to give Juliet the potion is not simply an act of complicity, but a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to prevent greater sorrow and bring peace to a fractured community. He represents the futile struggle of wisdom against ingrained hatred, a voice of reason drowned out by the clamor of the feud. The bees continue their gentle industry, oblivious to the tragic echoes of Verona. You realize that while the seeds of the friar's role were sown centuries ago, it was Shakespeare who brought his character to full, agonizing life, making him a poignant symbol of humanity's best intentions failing in the face of insurmountable odds. His presence, surrounded by these very herbs, serves as a quiet, enduring testament to the delicate balance between hope and despair, healing and harm, that lies at the heart of the greatest tragedies. You step into the quiet, sun-dappled nursery of a well-to-do Elizabethan home in 1595. The air is soft and still, carrying the clean scent of freshly laundered linens, a faint hint of lavender, and the comforting, subtle aroma of a sleeping infant. Pale morning light, filtered through fine muslin at the window, falls gently across a wooden cradle, intricately carved, and a small, embroidered sampler hanging on the wall. You hear only the softest rustle of fabric as a wet nurse, perhaps, gently rocks the cradle, her presence a silent, maternal anchor in this peaceful space. This intimate setting offers a glimpse into the profound bond that could form between a child and their caregiver, a bond Shakespeare so vividly captured. You might believe that the beloved, bawdy and utterly devoted nurse in Romeo and Juliet was entirely the product of Shakespeare's imagination, a character so vividly drawn that she feels uniquely his. And while her incomparable personality is indeed Shakespeare's masterstroke, the presence of a nurse figure in the story was not his invention. She existed in the earlier Italian retellings and in Arthur Brooks' poem, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet. In those versions, however, the nurse was largely a functional character, a messenger facilitating the lovers' secret meetings, a confidant without the vibrant, earthy personality you recognize. Shakespeare, with his deep insight into the human heart and the complexities of domestic life, transformed this minor figure into one of the play's most unforgettable characters. He understood the profound surrogate maternal relationship that often existed between a wealthy child and their wet nurse or foster mother in this era. For many noble children, the nurse was a more constant and affectionate presence than their often distant biological parents. Shakespeare gave Juliet's nurse a rich, distinctive voice, full of bawdy humor, endless chatter, and a boundless, if sometimes misguided, love for her charge. You can almost hear her recounting anecdotes of Juliet's childhood, her laughter echoing in this very nursery. Her character provides essential comic relief, a warm, human counterpoint to the escalating tragedy. But more than that, her deep, unconditional love for Juliet makes the young girl's isolation even more poignant when the nurse ultimately advises her to marry Paris. This moment of betrayal, born of practicality rather than malice, underscores Juliet's profound aloneness and the harsh realities of the world she inhabits. It highlights that even the strongest bonds of affection can be fractured by the pressures of family honor and societal expectations. As the quiet breathing of the infant fills the room, you realize how Shakespeare, by giving such depth and humanity to a seemingly minor figure, enriched the entire tragedy. He showed us that the grand, sweeping conflicts of noble houses are played out against a backdrop of deeply personal relationships, illustrating how even in the quiet corners of a nursery, loyalty, love, and heartbreak are profoundly intertwined, making Crescenti Romeo and Juliet ** a story that touches every human heart, across every age. You step onto the bustling Queen Hythe dock in 1595, a vibrant artery of London's maritime trade. The air is thick with the briny scent of the Thames, mingled with the earthy aroma of timber, the sweet smell of imported spices, and the pungent tang of fish from newly arrived catches. The incessant creak of ropes, the splash of oars, and the shouts of barge masters echo across the water, punctuated by the rhythmic thud of barrels being unloaded onto the cobbled quayside. Sunlight, glinting off the choppy river, illuminates the industrious ballet of traders, porters, and sailors. Here, goods from across the known world arrive, much like stories and ideas travel across borders, each one transformed by its journey. You might think that the final devastating moments of Romeo and Juliet, their tragic deaths in the tomb, united in sorrow, were always meant to evoke the profound sense of romantic loss and reconciliation that Shakespeare gives them. Yet, as we've traced the story's lineage from medieval Verona to Elizabethan London, you've discovered how dramatically its ultimate meaning was reshaped. The bare bones of the ending, the poison, the dagger, the shared tomb were certainly present in the earlier Italian novellas and Arthur Brooks' poem. However, their purpose, their emotional weight, was quite different. The original versions of Romeo and Juliet were, at their heart, cautionary tales. They presented the lovers' deaths not as a sublime sacrifice to love, but as a stark punishment for their impulsiveness, their defiance of parental authority, and their engagement in a clandestine marriage. For a Renaissance audience, steeped in strict social hierarchies and the imperatives of family honor and arranged marriages, the tragic conclusion served as a grim moral lesson. You were meant to recoil from their fate, understanding it as the inevitable outcome of reckless disobedience, a warning to young lovers contemplating similar rash actions against the societal order. Shakespeare, however, with his unparalleled gift for empathy and poetic expression, transformed this moralizing framework into a transcendent tragedy of star-crossed love. He didn't just tell you that they died. He made you feel the immensity of their loss, the profound waste of their young lives, and the heartbreaking beauty of their desperate devotion. His language imbues their final moments with an almost spiritual intensity, turning their suicides into a powerful, albeit tragic, affirmation of a love that could not exist in a world so consumed by hatred. The famous line, "For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo," perfectly encapsulates this shift. The focus is on the tire woe asterisk, the tragic beauty, not the moral failing. As the shouts of the bargemasters begin to fade into the river's lapping rhythm, you consider how Shakespeare's genius lies in this ultimate act of transformation. He took a centuries-old narrative, a historical whisper and a cautionary fable, and, through the sheer force of his poetry and dramatic insight, elevated it into a universal anthem to love's power and its tragic vulnerability. He created a story that, instead of merely warning you, moves you to tears, inviting you to reflect, not on moral lessons, but on the enduring mysteries of love and loss. You step into the thronged arcades of London's Royal Exchange in 1595, a grand, bustling edifice where merchants from across Europe converge. The air is alive with the multilingual clamor of trade, the crisp rustle of paper, and the rhythmic clink of coins. The scents of rich foreign spices, fine English wool, and the faint, sweet perfume of a lady's pomander blend with the earthy smell of damp stone. Amidst the press of humanity, you watch as a young man, perhaps an apprentice, discreetly passes a tiny, folded note to a woman, a delicate hint of lavender clinging to the parchment. It is a subtle gesture, a secret message amidst the public commerce. Much like the hidden depths of a familiar story, you have journeyed with me through the historical whispers of Verona, where the Montecchi and Cappelletti truly feuded, their rivalries so infamous that Dante immortalized them. We traversed the centuries to the Italian novellas of Deporto and Bandello, which gave names and narrative structure to the star-crossed lovers. Then, to Arthur Brooke's English poem, which laid out many of the plot points we recognize today: the secret marriage, the potion, the tomb. What you've learned is that while many elements of Romeo and Juliet existed long before Shakespeare, they were often embedded in a darker context, serving as cautionary tales, warning against disobedience and the perils of defiant love. But Shakespeare, in his singular brilliance, transformed this raw historical material and these moralistic predecessors into something transcendent. He didn't just retell a story, he imbued it with a universal, aching poetry that elevated it from a mere warning to an immortal tragedy of romantic love. He took the existing framework and refocused its very heart. He crafted the vibrant, cynical wit of Mercutio, whose death becomes the play's irreversible turning point. He brought to life the earthy, devoted, and ultimately conflicted nurse, giving Juliet a confidant, whose love, though flawed, makes her isolation all the more poignant. And he compressed months of narrative into just 4 intense days, accelerating the sense of desperate fate and inevitable doom. The Italian versions were darker, more concerned with family honor and the moral consequences of defying parental will. Shakespeare, however, made the central conflict less about the lovers' moral failing, and more about the overwhelming power of love against a world consumed by hatred. His lyrical language, his soaring verse, transformed their illicit passion into an almost spiritual force, making their ultimate, tragic sacrifice a heartbreaking affirmation of their bond. The sorrow you feel for Romeo and Juliet is not a judgment, but a profound empathy for a love too pure to survive in such a brutal reality. As the hum of trade begins to soften with the approaching dusk, and the scent of lavender from the note dissipates into the cool evening air, you realize that this is Shakespeare's enduring legacy. He took the grittier realities of history and the moral lessons of old tales, and through his unparalleled artistry he forged a narrative that speaks across centuries, touching the deepest chords of the human heart, leaving us not with a warning, but with a profound and timeless appreciation for love, in all its glorious tragic power. You step into the dim, aromatic confines of an apothecary's shop in 1595. The air is thick and complex, carrying the sharp, sweet tang of ground herbs, the earthy scent of dried roots, and the faint, metallic hint of mortar and pestle. Sunlight, struggling through small, dust-laden window panes, falls in weak shafts across rows of labeled jars, stoppered bottles, and bundles of drying plants hanging from the low ceiling. You hear the rhythmic, muffled thump-scrape asterisk of powders being carefully ground, the soft clink of glass, and the occasional hushed consultation between the apothecary and a customer. This is a place where remedies and poisons are carefully measured, where life and death hang in a delicate balance. You might think that the fateful sleeping potion given to Juliet, or the potent poison Romeo procures for himself, were dramatic flourishes, invented entirely by Shakespeare. Yet, as you observe the precise, quiet work of the apothecary, you discover that these pivotal elements of the tragedy had a long history in the story of Romeo and Juliet, existing in detail long before Shakespeare penned his play. Both Luigi da Porto's Italian novella of 1524, and Arthur Brooke's 1562 poem, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet*, explicitly feature the friar giving Julietta a sleeping draught to feign death and escape her arranged marriage. This was not an uncommon literary device in Renaissance tales, reflecting a real-world understanding of the potent, sometimes perilous properties of various plants and chemical compounds available to apothecaries and cunning women. Likewise, the concept of Romeo seeking out a quick-acting poison in his despair was also present in these earlier versions, a grim, desperate choice for a man who believed his beloved was lost. Shakespeare, however, took these existing elements and imbued them with an unparalleled dramatic intensity and tragic irony. He didn't invent the potion, or the poison, but he sharpened their edges, making them instruments of an inexorable fate. The apothecary in his play is not merely a supplier. He is a wretched, starving figure, highlighting the desperation that drives Romeo to procure the illegal, lethal draught. The scene where Romeo buys the poison is short, yet laden with a palpable sense of desperation and tragic inevitability. The misdelivery of Friar John's letter and the timing of Juliet's awakening are not just plot points, they become excruciating twists of fate, amplifying the tragedy exponentially. As the grinding of powders continues, a quiet, insistent rhythm in the shop, you realize that Shakespeare transformed these dangerous tools of the apothecary's trade into potent symbols of despair, miscommunication, and the cruel hand of destiny. He made them more than mere concoctions, he made them catalysts for a love story that would endure for centuries, deepening our understanding of how fragile life and hope can be, even in the hands of those who seek to heal. You settle into a quiet corner of a London chamber in 1595, the only light emanating from a single flickering tallow candle. Its soft yellow glow casts dancing shadows on the plastered walls and illuminates the worn pages of a small hand-bound book held close. The air is still and cool, carrying the faint smoky scent of the burning tallow and the comforting aroma of old paper and dust. You hear only the gentle crackle of the flame and the soft rustle as you turn a page, immersing yourself in the intimate world of a sonnet, a popular poetic form of the age, much like Shakespeare himself would have done. Tonight we draw our investigative journey to a close, a journey that peeled back the layers of a story you thought you knew, revealing its deep roots in history and literature. We've traveled from the actual feuds of the Montecchi and Cappelletti in medieval Verona, so notorious they were etched into Dante's verse, through the narrative forms shaped by Italian writers like Luigi da Porto and Matteo Bandello, who first named our lovers. We saw how Arthur Brooke's 1562 poem served as Shakespeare's direct literary ancestor, providing the framework of the plot, the secret marriage, the potion, the tomb scene. You've discovered that many of the core dramatic elements existed long before Shakespeare, but often within a darker context. The original Italian versions and even Brooke's poem presented a powerful cautionary tale, warning fiercely against youthful disobedience and the perils of defying parental authority in a society where arranged marriages were paramount. These were moralistic narratives, designed to instruct and deter, painting the lovers' tragic end as a just consequence of their rashness. Yet, as the gentle light of the candle illuminates the final lines of our reflection, the ultimate revelation is Shakespeare's unparalleled genius in transformation. He didn't invent Romeo and Juliet, nor did he invent the elements of their story, but he reinvented their meaning. By compressing the timeline from months to a few intense days, he made fate feel inescapable. By creating the unforgettable, vibrant characters of Mercutio and the nurse, he gave the tragedy humor, warmth, and profound human complexity, making the lovers' isolation even more stark. Most importantly, Shakespeare transformed a cautionary tale into a transcendent tragedy of romantic love. He infused the narrative with breathtaking poetry, elevating Romeo and Juliet's passion into an almost spiritual force. Their love, in his hands, becomes a beautiful, defiant light against the overwhelming darkness of their families' hatred. Their tragic deaths are no longer merely a moral lesson, but a heartbreaking testament to the power of love and its devastating vulnerability in an unforgiving world. As you close the book, the candle's flame gently dances, illuminating the quiet chamber. You realize Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet endures because he tapped into something eternal. The human heart's capacity for intense love and devastating loss, ensuring that this centuries-old story would forever speak across time, its beauty and sorrow echoing long after the final lines are read. You find yourself standing on a quiet London street in 1595, cloaked in the deep hush of midnight. The city, usually a cacophony of sound, now breathes softly, its narrow lanes swallowed by shadows. The air is cool and damp, carrying the faint, lingering scent of refuse and wood smoke from the day's hearths. Suddenly, a resonant voice pierces the stillness. Past midnight and all's well. It's the city watchman, his lantern a small, swinging beacon in the profound darkness, his call a comforting yet stark reminder of the fragile peace that settles over Elizabethan London after dusk. For those with secrets, or with desperate loves, the night holds both peril and promise. You might think that the concept of star-crossed lovers, individuals destined by fate for a tragic end, was a uniquely Shakespearean invention. But in truth, the motif of lovers caught in the cruel grip of destiny, often between feuding families, existed long before Shakespeare made it immortal. Stories of doomed love were woven into the very fabric of Renaissance literature, reflecting real historical instances where passionate individual choice clashed with the rigid social structures and violent vendetta cultures of medieval Italy. These were not mere flights of fancy but grim reflections of societal realities. The earlier Italian novellas by Da Porto and Bandello, and Arthur Brooks' poem that Shakespeare drew from, already contained a strong sense of fatalism. The lovers were depicted as unfortunate souls, victims of circumstance, and the entrenched hatreds of their houses. The notion of Fortuna, a powerful, often capricious goddess of fate, was a pervasive idea in Renaissance thought, and her influence was often seen as the ultimate arbiter of human destiny. The original audiences understood that these lovers were indeed ill-starred, their lives governed by forces beyond their control. Shakespeare, however, intensified this sense of inescapable fate to a degree that makes the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet uniquely heartbreaking. He didn't just mention destiny, he made it an active, relentless force. From the very first lines of his prologue, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, you are told their inevitable doom. This immediate foreshadowing creates a profound dramatic irony, where every moment of fleeting joy is underscored by the audience's knowledge of the coming sorrow. Shakespeare uses imagery of stars and heaven to emphasize this predetermined end, making Romeo and Juliet's efforts to defy their families feel not just brave, but utterly, beautifully futile against the cosmic forces aligned against them. As the watchman's voice fades into the distance, leaving the street to the quiet shadows once more, you reflect on the powerful weight of destiny. Shakespeare took an ancient motif, a historical reality of lovers caught in feuds, and through his masterful poetry and dramatic foresight, he crafted a tragedy where fate itself becomes a character. He shows us that even in the darkest night, and in the face of insurmountable odds, the human spirit will reach for connection, making the story of these star-crossed lovers a timeless testament to the beauty and sorrow of love's enduring struggle against the forces that seek to extinguish it. You step into the intense heat and deafening clang of a London smithy in 1595. The air is thick with the acrid scent of coal smoke and superheated iron, making your eyes water slightly. Sparks shower like tiny angry stars as a burly blacksmith, his arms gleaming with sweat, brings his hammer down with powerful rhythmic blows on a glowing piece of steel. The deafening clang 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 asterisk echoes off the stone walls, punctuated by the roar of the bellows fanning the forge. He is forging a nobleman's rapier, a tool of honor and, all too often, of deadly conflict. The raw metal is being shaped, tempered, made sharp and true. Much like a centuries-old story is refined and honed into a masterpiece. You have journeyed with me through the historical bedrock of Romeo and Juliet asterisk, the real Montecchi and Cappelletti families, whose brutal feuds Dante documented in medieval Verona. You've traced the literary lineage from Luigi da Porto's 1524 novella, through Matteo Bandello's dramatic expansions, to Arthur Brooke's 1562 English poem, which laid the detailed groundwork for the plot. You've seen how many of the story's iconic elements, the balcony scene, the secret marriage, the potion, the tomb, and the lover's ultimate demise, were already present, like the raw steel in the smithy. But as the blacksmith quenches the hot metal, sending a cloud of hiss and steam into the air, you are reminded that Shakespeare's genius lay not in inventing these elements, but in transforming them. The earlier versions, including Brooke's, presented Romeo and Juliet's tragedy primarily as a cautionary tale. Their deaths were often framed as a moral lesson, a grim consequence of their disobedience to parents and their reckless defiance of societal norms. The narratives were darker, focusing on family honor and the perils of passion. You were meant to reflect on the dangers of such behavior, to be warned. Shakespeare, however, performed the ultimate act of dramatic alchemy. He took this cautionary framework, and, through his unparalleled poetry and profound understanding of the human heart, forged it into a transcendent tragedy of star-crossed love. He made their love so incandescent, so pure, that their deaths become not merely punishment, but a heartbreaking, beautiful sacrifice. His version concludes not just with sorrow, but with the poignant reconciliation of the feuding families, brought about by their shared, agonizing grief. The final lines of his play, spoken by Prince Aeschylus, lament the collective failure that led to such woe, inviting a deeper, more universal reflection on the destructive power of hate, and the redemptive potential of shared sorrow. As the smithy cools slightly, the ringing of the hammer replaced by the gentle crackle of the embers, you realize Shakespeare didn't just tell a story, he crafted an experience. He didn't diminish the grittier historical truth. He honored it by showing how from bitter conflict and ancient grudges, an enduring narrative of love and loss could be forged sharp and true, to resonate with every human heart across every generation. This then is the enduring legacy of his genius, to take the iron of history, and the fire of human emotion, and to create something immortal. You step into the raucous, brutal spectacle of a bear baiting ring in 1595 London, perhaps on Bankside, not far from where Shakespeare's Globe Theatre would soon stand. The air is thick with the hot, visceral scent of animal fur, stale ale, and damp earth churned by frantic paws. A low, guttural growl rips through the roar of the excited crowd, followed by the frenzied baying of dogs. Sunlight, harsh and unfiltered, beats down upon the wooden arena, illuminating the grim dance of survival. You feel the raw, untamed energy of the common folk gathered for this crude entertainment, a stark contrast to the refined artistry we've been exploring. Amidst this primal chaos, your eye might catch a stolen glance between two people across the crowd, a momentary spark of human connection in the unyielding clamor. This very scene, this blend of brutal spectacle and fleeting human moments, perfectly captures the essence of our journey into the origins of Romeo and Juliet. You might have always assumed this tale sprang fully formed from Shakespeare's mind, a pure invention of his poetic genius. But our investigative journey has shown a surprising truth. The story of these star-crossed lovers existed for centuries before him, a tapestry woven from real historical events and evolving literary traditions. We began in the actual medieval Verona, where the Montecchi and Cappelletti families truly feuded, their deadly rivalry so infamous that Dante Alighieri etched it into his asterisk Purgatorio. From this bedrock of historical violence, the tale grew through Italian literary predecessors. Luigi da Porto, in 1524, gave our lovers their familiar names, Romeo and Juliet, in his novella. Then Matteo Bandello, in 1554, expanded the narrative, adding dramatic elements that would later be adopted. Arthur Brooks' 1562 English poem, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet*, became Shakespeare's most direct source, already containing much of the plot. The Masked Ball, The Secret Marriage, Friar Lawrence's Potion, the desperate tomb scene, and the tragic double suicide. Yet, as you consider the raw, unpolished entertainment of the bear-baiting ring, you realize what makes Shakespeare's version definitive. The earlier Italian tales and even Brooks' poem were often darker, more focused on the grim realities of family honor, vendetta, and served primarily as cautionary warnings against defying parents and social conventions. They were indeed tragedies, but they were morality plays more than romantic epics. Shakespeare took this grittier, more didactic material, and, with his unparalleled poetic and dramatic insight, transformed it into a transcendent work of art. He invented the vibrant, witty Mercutio, whose death irrevocably plunges the play into tragedy. He crafted the earthy, loyal, and endlessly talkative nurse, giving Juliet a deeply human confidant. And he compressed the timeline from months to a few intense, desperate days, heightening the sense of inevitable doom. Most profoundly, Shakespeare infused the story with an overwhelming sense of romantic love, making Romeo and Juliet's passion the beating heart of the tragedy. Their devotion becomes so powerful that their deaths are not merely a punishment, but a heart-wrenching sacrifice, an enduring testament to love's beauty and its devastating vulnerability in a world consumed by hate. As the cries of the crowd begin to soften, and the harsh light of the arena begins to fade with the wane of the afternoon, you realize Shakespeare didn't diminish the historical truth or the literary inheritance. Instead, he elevated it, forging a timeless masterpiece from the very stuff of human conflict and enduring love. His Romeo and Juliet remains immortal, not just as a story, but as a profound reflection on the human spirit, echoing with an emotional power that speaks across centuries, long after the last roar of the bear has faded. You find yourself standing amidst the bustling, boisterous groundlings in the pit of the Globe Theatre, likely in the year 1599, just after its grand opening on Bankside. The afternoon sun warms your face as you crane your neck, jostled by the eager crowd. The air is thick with the mingled scents of sweat, stale beer, and the pungent aroma of oranges and gingerbread sold by hawkers. You hear the excited roar of the crowd, the impatient stamping of feet on the bare earth, and the anticipatory murmurs before the play begins. This is where Shakespeare's magic truly came alive, where raw history and literary threads were woven into unforgettable spectacle. You have journeyed with me tonight, tracing the astonishing lineage of Romeo and Juliet *, far beyond what many might assume. We began by uncovering the real Montecchi and Cappelletti families, whose brutal feuds tore through medieval Verona, so infamous that Dante Alighieri himself immortalized their strife in his Purgatorio. We then moved through the Italian literary landscape, finding the first-named versions of our star-crossed lovers in Luigi da Porto's 1524 novella, and the expanded dramatic elements in Matteo Bandello's 1554 retelling. Finally, we arrived at Arthur Brooks' 1562 English poem, Niamh Common's Constos, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet *, which provided Shakespeare with the direct blueprint for much of his plot: The Masked Ball, The Secret Marriage, Friar Lawrence's Potion, the desperate tomb scene, and the tragic double suicide. Yet, as you stand here, feeling the vibrant energy of Shakespeare's theatre, you understand the profound difference he made. The earlier versions were often darker, more focused on the grim realities of family honor and vendetta, and primarily served as cautionary tales. They warned against youthful impetuousness and the perils of defying parents and societal conventions. They presented the lovers' deaths as a moral lesson, a just, if harsh, consequence of their rash disobedience. Shakespeare, however, performed the ultimate alchemy. He didn't invent the story, but he reinvented its heart and soul. He created the unforgettable, vibrant characters of Mercutio and the nurse, whose wit, humor, and deep humanity make the tragedy's descent all the more poignant. He masterfully compressed the timeline from months to just a few intense, desperate days, heightening the sense of inescapable fate and relentless urgency. Most importantly, through his unparalleled poetic language and profound dramatic insight, Shakespeare transformed a cautionary tale into a transcendent tragedy of romantic love. He infused Romeo and Juliet's passion with such overwhelming beauty and intensity that their tragic deaths become not merely a punishment, but a heartbreaking, sublime sacrifice, an enduring testament to love's power and its devastating vulnerability in a world consumed by hatred. As the roar of the groundlings swells and fades and the first lines of a play are spoken from the wooden stage, you realize Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet * remains immortal, because he tapped into something universal. He took the grittier historical truths and the moral lessons of old tales, and through his unparalleled artistry, he forged a narrative that speaks across centuries, touching the deepest chords of the human heart, leaving us not with a warning, but with a profound and timeless appreciation for love in all its glorious, tragic power. You step into the smoky, boisterous warmth of a Southwark tavern in 1595, a popular haunt for players and ordinary folk alike, just across the Thames from the city. The air is thick with the sweet, heady scent of ale, mingled with the tang of cheap tobacco and the earthy smell of damp rushes on the floor. Laughter, coarse jokes, and the drone of conversation rise and fall around you, accompanied by the clinking of pewter tankards and the occasional off-key strumming of a lute from a corner. Through the haze you see faces illuminated by the flickering firelight and the dim glow of tallow candles, their expressions animated by gossip and shared stories. Here, amidst the clamor, tales are spun, exaggerated, and passed from mouth to ear, shaping the very fabric of popular understanding. You might think that the story of Romeo and Juliet as you know it, with its passionate, transcendent love and heartbreaking end, was always understood in that way. But our journey has shown how its meaning evolved, shaped by the cultural context of each retelling, much like a whispered rumor changes with every new ear. The earliest Italian versions, the novellas by Luigi da Porto and Matteo Bandello, and even Arthur Brooks' English poem, were often interpreted very differently from Shakespeare's play. The cultural context of Renaissance Italy, where the story first truly took shape, was one where family loyalty and honor, alongside arranged marriages, were paramount. Vendetta culture meant that feuds like that of the Montecchi and Cappelletti were a harsh reality, and defying one's parents was a serious transgression. Therefore, the early iterations of Romeo and Juliet were steeped in a cautionary morality. The lovers' tragic fates were presented as direct consequences of their youthful impulsiveness, their secret marriage, and their profound disobedience to their families. The stories aimed to warn, to impress upon their audience the dangers of illicit love, and the bitter fruits of challenging the established social order. You were meant to see their demise as a grim but perhaps just outcome for their rash actions. Shakespeare, however, with his genius for character and universal human emotion, recognized that the story offered more than just a moral lesson. He took the existing framework of feuding families, forbidden love, and a tragic ending, and fundamentally shifted its focus. He didn't invent the concept of star-crossed lovers. That motif was already present, reflecting the era's belief in fate, but he made their love itself the central, most powerful force. He began to transform the story from a warning against defying parents into an exploration of the beauty and tragedy of love, struggling against an intractable world of hate. As the tavern's hubbub begins to soften and the shadows deepen, you realize that Shakespeare didn't diminish the historical elements or the previous literary forms. Instead, he absorbed them, using the existing tale as a scaffold upon which to build something far more profound. He changed the story's very heartbeat, making it a celebration of love, even in its most tragic manifestation, ensuring its timeless resonance. You step into a quiet, orderly scribe's chamber in 1595. A room dedicated to the careful crafting of legal documents. The air is dry and still, carrying the faint, crisp scent of parchment and the rich, metallic aroma of ink. Sunlight, diffused by a leaded window, falls softly onto a heavy oak table, illuminating a quill pen, a pot of dark ink, and several meticulously folded documents tied with ribbon. You hear only the soft rhythmic scratch of the scribe's quill as he works, his precise hand forming elegant letters, each stroke adding weight and legality to the words. This is where futures are decided, alliances forged, and destinies meticulously outlined on paper, particularly when it comes to marriage. You have journeyed through the layers of history and literature that shaped Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, from the actual feuds of the Montecchi and Cappelletti in medieval Verona, so vividly captured by Dante, to the moralizing Italian novellas and Arthur Brooks' English poem. We've explored how these earlier versions, while containing the core elements of the story, were essentially cautionary tales, emphasizing the grim consequences of defying family honor and the strategic imperative of arranged marriages. A marriage contract, like the one being so carefully drawn up here, was not just a piece of paper. It was the foundation of family stability, wealth, and power in Elizabethan England, just as it was in Renaissance Italy. But as you watch the scribe carefully seal a document with warm wax, you realize the profound impact of Shakespeare's transformation. He didn't invent the pressure for Juliet to marry Paris, nor the legal contracts that would formalize such a union. Indeed, he highlights this very conflict. Juliet's parents insist on her marriage to Paris, a politically and economically advantageous match, reflecting the harsh realities of noble life. In the earlier versions, Juliet's resistance and secret marriage were acts of profound disobedience, making her tragic end a deserved fate in the eyes of many. The final scene often emphasized the family's lesson learned, a return to order after a costly transgression. Shakespeare, however, took this rigid legal and social framework and infused it with an overwhelming transcendent pathos. While the contract for Paris would have symbolized the ultimate societal pressure, Shakespeare's focus shifts from the legality of marriage to the raw, visceral tragedy of its interruption by profound love and hate. His ending is not merely a cautionary tale about defying parents. Instead, it becomes a powerful, almost spiritual reconciliation, born from the deepest grief. The final peace between the Montagues and Capulets is not enforced by law, but forged in the crucible of their children's shared tomb, a testament to the ultimate, devastating cost of their ancient feud. It's a peace achieved not through a marriage contract, but through the broken hearts of two families. As the scent of hot wax slowly fades from the chamber, leaving only the quiet dignity of the scribe's work, you reflect on Shakespeare's ultimate genius. He took the practical, contractual realities of his age, and the moralistic warnings of his sources, and elevated them into a story that speaks of love, so powerful it transcends death, and hate so fierce it destroys all. He transformed a legal document of tragic facts into a universal testament to human emotion, ensuring that Romeo and Juliet's tale would forever move us, long after the last contract is sealed. You step into a hushed London alleyway on a stifling summer afternoon in 1595. The air, usually thick with the city's clamor, is strangely still, heavy with a humid silence that feels more oppressive than any noise. A faint, cloying scent of stale water and desperate attempts at cleanliness, perhaps a neighbor's window herbs or vinegar, mingles with the pervasive urban odors. You hear the buzzing of flies, unnervingly loud in the quiet, and the distant, muffled ring of a bell from a parish church. Whispers, like the oppressive heat, spread from house to house, rumors of the plague, an invisible terror that can sweep through the city, closing down commerce, and locking families within their homes. You might think that the tragic miscommunication in Romeo and Juliet, the fatal failure of Friar John to deliver his crucial letter to Romeo, was simply a convenient plot device. But in Shakespeare's world, and in the Verona of the story, the threat of plague was a terrifying reality that could, and often did, disrupt every aspect of daily life, especially communication and travel. The play directly references this, explaining that Friar John was quarantined, held in a sealed house, for fear he had been exposed to the pestilence. His inability to reach Romeo with news of Juliet's feigned death is not just a contrivance. It's a brilliant, historically grounded stroke of tragic irony. Imagine the fear that gripped a city at the first breath of plague. Houses suspected of harboring the disease would be immediately boarded up, their inhabitants forbidden to leave, a stark red cross painted on the door as a chilling warning. This was quarantine, a desperate measure to contain the spread, and it meant total isolation. For a friar carrying a vital message, encountering such a quarantined house meant he himself would be confined, prevented from completing his mission. Such events were not uncommon. Entire districts could be isolated, travel restricted, and important messages delayed or lost, all because of an unseen enemy. As the oppressive heat of the afternoon lingers, you realize how Shakespeare, with his profound understanding of both human passion and the harsh realities of his age, wove this grim historical truth into the very fabric of his immortal tragedy. He didn't invent the plague, but he used its terrible power, its capacity for disruption and isolation, to drive the final devastating turn of events. This natural, terrifying force becomes another instrument of fate, sealing the lovers' doom with a twist of cruel, historically accurate irony. The silence of the afternoon deepens as you contemplate the ways in which the smallest, most unforeseen obstacles can lead to the greatest sorrows, even in the grandest of love stories. You find yourself on a quiet, sunless London lane in 1595. A narrow path, usually bustling but now hushed and ominous. The humid air, thick with the lingering scent of smoke and uncollected refuse, feels heavy, as if holding its breath. Your gaze falls upon a door, weathered timber contrasting starkly with a crude yet chilling symbol freshly painted upon it, a vibrant red cross. Below it, a chilling inscription perhaps, "Lord have mercy on us," barely visible in the perpetual shadow. No sound emerges from within, no stirring, only a profound, unsettling silence. This is a quarantined house, sealed by order of the civic authorities, a grim testament to the invisible terror of the plague that periodically gripped Elizabethan London. You might remember how Friar John, in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet asterisk, is prevented from delivering the crucial letter to Romeo, the one that explains Juliet's feigned death. He is quarantined due to suspicion of plague. This isn't just a convenient plot twist. It is a stark and accurate reflection of the very real fear and public health measures of Shakespeare's time, and indeed, of Renaissance Italy. When the plague descended, houses suspected of harboring the sickness would be immediately sealed, their inhabitants, sick or well, confined within. The red cross on the door was a universal, terrifying signal of contagion, effectively cutting off communication and isolating families from the outside world. Imagine the swift, brutal impact of such an order. For a friar, or anyone, carrying a vital message, encountering a quarantined house meant they too would be confined, unable to travel or interact, for fear of spreading the pestilence. This wasn't an act of malice, but of desperate survival, a communal attempt to halt the relentless march of an unseen enemy. Entire streets, sometimes whole districts, could fall silent, choked by this fear. The disruption to daily life, to commerce, and to the very fabric of society was immense, and the failure of messages to pass between individuals was a tragic, but common consequence. As you gaze at the chilling red cross, its stark color seeming to absorb the light, you recognize how Shakespeare, with his deep understanding of the practical and terrifying realities of his era, masterfully integrated this element into his tragedy. He didn't invent the plague, but he used its relentless power, its capacity for disruption and isolation, to drive the final devastating turn of events. The quarantine door, the undelivered letter, the fatal miscommunication, all become excruciating twists of fate, amplifying the tragedy exponentially. This terrifying, historically grounded obstacle becomes another star, another cruel force, aligned against the lovers. The eerie quiet of the lane settles around you, broken only by a distant church bell tolling the hour. You realize that Shakespeare's ultimate genius lay in transforming these grittier realities of historical existence, and the cautionary tales of his predecessors, into a transcendent work of art. He didn't diminish the world's harshness, rather he honored it by showing how even within its most brutal constraints, love could burn with an incandescent light, making the story of Romeo and Juliet a profound, enduring meditation on destiny, communication, and the enduring human spirit, long after the last plague has passed. You find yourself standing at one of London's mighty city gates in 1595, perhaps Ludgate, as the last vestiges of twilight fade into true night. The massive oak doors, studded with iron, are already shut and barred, enforcing the city's strict curfew. The air is cold and damp against your face, carrying the faint, earthy scent of ancient stone, and the distant, muffled sounds of the city's slumber. A few sputtering torches illuminate the stern faces of the gatekeepers, their breath misting in the chill. Suddenly, out of the profound darkness of the road beyond, a lone figure appears, riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat. He is a messenger, frantic, his urgent shouts echoing against the formidable stone walls, demanding entry long after the city has locked itself away for the night. You might think that such desperate, frantic arrivals were mere dramatic invention in tales of old. But in Shakespeare's time, and indeed for centuries prior in medieval Italian cities like Verona, city gates were the lifelines and choke points of urban existence. After curfew, typically around 9 or 10 in the evening, these gates were firmly closed, secured against bandits, fire, and other dangers of the night. Travel after dark was perilous, and communication even more so. A messenger arriving after the gates had been sealed faced a significant, often insurmountable, obstacle, highlighting the immense difficulty and precariousness of transmitting vital news across distances. Consider the story of Romeo and Juliet. This scene of a frantic messenger brings to mind Balthazar, Romeo's servant, who rides to Mantua with the utterly devastating and tragically misinterpreted news of Juliet's death. His journey, through potentially dangerous roads and across borders, was slow and vulnerable to countless hazards. In a world without instantaneous communication, where messages could take days or even weeks to travel, the accuracy and timely delivery of information hung by the thinnest thread. The very real risk of a messenger being delayed, waylaid, or simply unable to gain entry to a fortified city after hours was a crucial, historically grounded vulnerability that Shakespeare understood intimately. As the gatekeepers slowly, grudgingly, begin to consider the frantic messenger's pleas, you sense the precariousness of life and love in this age. Shakespeare, with his genius for weaving historical realities into his narratives, used this very fragility of communication to amplify the tragedy of his star-crossed lovers. He didn't invent the difficulties of travel or the strictures of city gates. He made them potent instruments of fate, turning an ancient story of feuding families into a timeless lament about mischance and the profound human vulnerability to forces beyond our control. The messenger's shouts fade into the cold night as you contemplate how easily grand hopes can unravel through the smallest, most human of delays. You step onto the Great North Road in 1595, a vital artery of England, yet now a treacherous ribbon of mud and mire under an unforgiving autumn rain. The sky hangs low, a bruised grey, and a chill wind whips the falling drops into your face. The air is heavy with the earthy scent of wet soil, decaying leaves, and the strong familiar smell of damp wool from your cloak. Your boots sink with a squelching sound into deep ruts, each step an effort as water pools and splashes. The distant rumble of a farmer's cart, its wheels struggling in the muck, is the only sound apart from the ceaseless drumming of the rain. This is travel in Shakespeare's England, arduous and fraught with delay, a stark contrast to the urgency of a secret message. You might think that the rapid unraveling of Friar Lawrence's careful plan in Travel Romeo and Juliet * was purely a matter of dramatic timing and unfortunate coincidences. But in this era, the physical reality of travel and communication across any distance was inherently slow and dangerous. A truth that Shakespeare skillfully wove into the very fabric of his tragedy. The Great North Road, like most thoroughfares, was unpaved, turning into a muddy quagmire with every autumn shower. Journeys that now take hours could then take days or even weeks, prolonged by weather, poor road conditions, and the ever-present threat of highwaymen. Consider the desperate journey of Friar John, tasked with delivering the crucial letter explaining Juliet's feigned death to Romeo in Mantua. His failure to reach Romeo wasn't just a literary mishap. It was a plausible, almost inevitable consequence of travel in the 16th century. Beyond the specific quarantine we discussed, the sheer physical act of travel was an obstacle. Messengers faced flooded rivers, broken-down carts, fatigue and delays at every turn. A horse could go lame, a path could be impassable, or a simple misstep in the mire could cost precious hours. Such delays were a common hardship, making the timely transmission of vital news a precarious gamble. As you stand amidst the mud and mire, feeling the chill seep into your bones, you recognize how Shakespeare's genius lies in grounding the cosmic tragedy of star-crossed lovers in such gritty, relatable realities. He didn't invent the arduous nature of travel, he simply allowed it to play its part in the unfolding doom. The failure of Friar John's letter, hastened by the delays of the road, becomes not a contrived event, but a historically resonant act of fate, adding an agonizing layer of inevitability to the lovers' demise. The world itself, with its imperfect roads and slow communications, conspires against them. The ceaseless patter of rain begins to soften, washing the autumn air clean. You reflect on how Shakespeare, by embedding his grand romantic tragedy within the harsh, physical realities of his time, made it all the more powerful. He showed that even the deepest love can be undone by the simple, everyday challenges of a muddy road and an undelivered message, leaving you with a quiet, enduring sense of how fragile life and love can be against the relentless march of circumstance. You step into the quiet, anxious chamber of a grand Elizabethan house in 1595. The air is still and cool, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of unburnt beeswax from candles that remain unlit, and perhaps the faint, metallic tang of unexpressed tears. Pale, watery sunlight filters weakly through a high, leaded window, doing little to dispel the shadows that cling to the rich tapestries and heavy wooden furniture. You hear only the distant, muffled sounds of the household, a soft creak of floorboards and the whisper of the wind against the panes, all serving to amplify the profound stillness within this room, a place where a desperate plan might be hatched. You might think that the idea of a powerful sleeping draught, a potion that mimics death, was a fantastical invention, unique to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Yet, as you absorb the quiet tension of this chamber, it's revealed that the concept of such a potent concoction, a temporary balm or a desperate deception, existed long before Shakespeare's quill touched parchment. Both Luigi da Porto's 1524 Italian novella and Arthur Brooke's 1562 English poem, The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet *, explicitly feature the friar providing Julietta with a sleeping potion. This draught was designed to make her appear dead, allowing her to escape an unwanted forced marriage and reunite with her beloved. Such remedies, while perhaps not always as dramatically effective as in literature, were a part of the real-world understanding of herbs and medicine in the Renaissance. Apothecaries and herbalists held a vast knowledge of plants that could induce sleep, calm the nerves, or in larger doses, lead to a death-like stupor. The notion of a feigned death through such means was therefore not entirely alien to the imagination of the time, providing a plausible, if perilous, plot device for writers. In the earlier versions, the potion was primarily a means to an end, a functional element in a cautionary tale about defiance. Shakespeare, however, with his profound grasp of human emotion and dramatic irony, transformed the sleeping draught into far more than a simple plot device. In his hands, the potion becomes a terrifying gamble, a symbol of Juliet's desperate love and unwavering resolve. You hear her agonizing soliloquy before she drinks it, contemplating the horrors of waking in the tomb, her fears made palpable and real. This intimate moment of personal choice, of facing down mortal terror for love, elevates her act from mere obedience to a plan, into a profound, courageous testament to her devotion. The potion is no longer just a substance. It's the catalyst for the final, heartbreaking acceleration of fate, an instrument of love tragically turned. As the stillness in the chamber deepens, you reflect on how Shakespeare, by making Juliet's decision to take the potion so deeply personal and emotionally charged, transformed a centuries-old literary element into a moment of transcendent human drama, He ensures that even in her feigned death, Juliet embodies a love so powerful, it defies the very boundaries of life, making her story, and the quiet despair of that sleeping draught, echo through the ages. You step into the quiet shadowed chamber of a sick room in 1595 London, where a physician stands contemplating a figure beneath a heavy linen sheet. The air is cool, carrying the sharp, medicinal tang of distilled spirits, and the muted scent of dried herbs, perhaps wormwood or lavender, meant to ease suffering. A sliver of pale grey light filters through a high mullioned window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air, and casting long, soft shadows across the worn wooden floor. You hear only the soft, shallow breathing of the patient, a fragile sound, and the occasional rustle of the physician's heavy velvet gown as he shifts, his brow furrowed in thought. This is a place where life balances precariously on the edge of the unknown. You might believe that the potent sleeping draught Friar Lawrence gives to Juliet, a potion designed to mimic death, was a fantastical invention unique to Shakespeare's stage. Yet, as you observe the physician, his knowledge, a blend of ancient wisdom and limited understanding, it becomes clear that such powerful concoctions were very much a part of Renaissance medicine. Apothecaries and physicians of this era understood that various herbs and compounds could induce deep sleep, slow the pulse, and cool the body to a state resembling death. These substances were known, and their effects, though perhaps not precisely controllable, were certainly within the realm of possibility. Both Luigi da Porto's 1524 Italian novella and Arthur Brooke's 1562 English poem, which directly influenced Shakespeare, already contained the pivotal element of the friar supplying Giulietta with a sleeping draught. This was a crucial plot device, intended to facilitate her escape from an unwanted marriage and her reunion with Romeo. In those earlier versions, the potion was a functional part of the narrative, a means to an end in a cautionary tale about defying familial expectations. The moral implications of manipulating life and death, though present, were often subservient to the larger lesson of disobedience. Shakespeare, however, took this existing element, and, with his profound psychological insight, imbued it with an agonizing dramatic weight. He transformed the physician-like figure of the friar, from a mere dispenser of remedies, into a burdened, morally complex character. You sense the friar's contemplation of the potion, his hope mingled with the terrifying risk. He knows the precarious line between healing and harm, the fragile boundary between life and death. The potion in Shakespeare's hands is not just a substance, it becomes an instrument of desperate hope that tragically backfires, driven by a series of devastating miscommunications. As the physician quietly adjusts a phial on a nearby table, you reflect on how Shakespeare, by deepening the moral and emotional stakes of such a dangerous remedy, transformed it into a powerful symbol of fate. He didn't invent the sleeping draught, but he made its consequences feel intimately human and universally tragic. He ensures that even the most carefully planned medical intervention, born of good intentions, can be twisted by circumstance into the catalyst for ultimate sorrow, leaving you with a quiet, enduring sense of the delicate balance between hope and despair. Even in the stillness of a sick room, you find yourself aboard a small boat on the Thames in 1595, steadily pulling away from the familiar, bustling wharves of London. The city, a sprawling mass of timber-framed houses and church steeples, gradually recedes into the soft, grey light of late afternoon. The air is cool and damp against your face, carrying the briny scent of the river water, mingled with the faint, lingering aroma of the city's myriad smells: smoke, damp earth, human activity, now fading with distance. You hear the rhythmic splash of oars, the creak of the small wooden hull, and the mournful cries of gulls circling overhead, sounds that emphasize the profound sense of departure, of leaving a world behind. For many in Elizabethan England, to be sent from one's city, from one's home, was a punishment second only to death itself: banishment. You might believe that Romeo's banishment from Verona, his agonizing separation from Juliet, was simply a plot device unique to Shakespeare's dramatic flair. Yet, the concept of banishment or exile was a very real and severe punishment in Renaissance society, both in England and in the Italian city-states. To be banished meant to be cut off from your community, your family, your livelihood, and your very identity. It was considered a kind of living death, a forfeiture of all that made life meaningful within the confines of a city-centric world. The earlier Italian novellas of Luigi da Porto and Matteo Bandello, and Arthur Brooks' poem, all featured Romeo's banishment as a direct consequence of his killing of Tybalt, a grim but expected act of justice in a world governed by honor and retribution. However, Shakespeare, with his unparalleled genius for human emotion, transformed this act of justice into a moment of profound, agonizing tragedy. In the earlier versions, Romeo's banishment was presented with a moralistic tone, a deserved punishment for his rash actions. But Shakespeare's Romeo sees banishment as worse than death, crying out, "There is no world without Verona walls, but purgatory, torture, hell itself." This passionate outcry elevates the punishment from a simple legal decree to an unbearable existential agony. Shakespeare focuses on the devastating personal impact of this separation, making it the catalyst for the lovers' increasingly desperate actions. He allows you to feel the deep, cutting despair of being forcibly torn from one's beloved, from one's entire known existence. As the London skyline continues to shrink into the distance, its familiar shape blurring with the horizon, you sense the loneliness of such a departure. Shakespeare took a harsh reality of his age, a legal punishment, and through his extraordinary poetry, transformed it into a universal symbol of the devastating power of separation. He showed that the ultimate cruelty often lies not in death, but in the agonizing, unfulfilled longing for love, making Romeo's banishment resonate as a truly heartbreaking element of their star-crossed fate. You settle onto a hard wooden bench in the common room of a wayside coaching inn, somewhere on the outskirts of London in 1595. The air is thick, with the mingled scents of stale ale, roasting mutton, and damp woolen cloaks drying by the roaring hearth. Outside, the last sliver of twilight has vanished, leaving the world to the deep quiet of the countryside. Here, travelers, perhaps weary from a long journey, eat their evening meal. You hear the low murmur of conversation, the clinking of pewter tankards, and the crackle of the fire, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn beams above. A simple meal of bread and stew is set before you, a solitary comfort after a day's travel, a moment of quiet reflection before the darkness of sleep. Our journey tonight, like a long road, has brought us to a deeper understanding of the story of Romeo and Juliet. You might have always believed that this iconic tragedy sprang fully formed from Shakespeare's singular genius, a tale born entirely from his quill. But our investigative journey has revealed a richer, more complex truth. The story of these star-crossed lovers existed for centuries before him. A rich tapestry woven from real historical events and evolving literary traditions across Italy and England. We began in medieval Verona, uncovering the actual Montecchi and Cappelletti families, whose brutal feuds were so infamous that Dante Alighieri himself documented their strife in his Purgatorio. From this bedrock of historical violence, the tale began its literary evolution through Italian predecessors. Luigi da Porto, in 1524, gave our lovers their familiar names, Romeo and Julieta, in his novella. Then Matteo Bandello, in 1554, expanded the narrative, adding dramatic elements that would later be adopted. Finally, Arthur Brooks' 1562 English poem, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet *, became Shakespeare's most direct source, already containing much of the plot you know: the masked ball, the secret marriage, Friar Lawrence's potion, the desperate tomb scene, and the tragic double suicide. Yet, as you finish your quiet meal, the true brilliance of Shakespeare comes into focus. The earlier Italian tales, and even Brooks' poem, were often darker, more focused on the grim realities of family honor, vendetta, and served primarily as cautionary warnings against defying parents and social conventions. They were indeed tragedies, but they were morality plays more than romantic epics. Shakespeare took this grittier, more didactic material, and, with his unparalleled poetic and dramatic insight, transformed it into a transcendent work of art. He invented the vibrant, witty Mercutio whose death irrevocably plunges the play into tragedy. He crafted the earthy, loyal and endlessly talkative nurse, giving Juliet a deeply human confidant. He compressed the timeline from months to a few intense, desperate days, heightening the sense of inevitable doom. Most profoundly, Shakespeare infused the story with an overwhelming sense of romantic love, making Romeo and Juliet's passion the beating heart of the tragedy. Their devotion becomes so powerful that their deaths are not merely a punishment, but a heart-wrenching sacrifice, an enduring testament to love's beauty and its devastating vulnerability in a world consumed by hate. As the inn's common room settles into a peaceful, drowsy hum, you realize Shakespeare didn't diminish the historical truth or the literary inheritance. Instead, he elevated it, forging a timeless masterpiece from the very stuff of human conflict and enduring love. His Romeo and Juliet * remains immortal, not just as a story, but as a profound reflection on the human spirit, echoing with an emotional power that speaks across centuries, long after the last traveler has found their rest. You step into the clamorous, inky world of a printer's workshop on Fleet Street in 1595. The air is thick with the distinct, metallic scent of fresh ink, the dry tang of paper, and the earthy aroma of oiled wood. The dominant sound is the rhythmic thunk * and creak of the printing press, followed by the clatter of loose metal type as apprentices hustle to set individual letters into frames. Sunlight, filtered and dim, struggles through small, grime-streaked windows, casting a hazy glow on busy hands, dark smudges of ink, and piles of newly printed broadsides. You might watch a young runner, barely more than a boy, rushing in, clutching a sealed letter, ready to set off into the labyrinthine streets, a small but vital cog in the precarious system of Elizabethan communication. You might think that the fateful misdelivery of Friar John's letter to Romeo, in Torpor Malot's Romeo and Juliet * was simply an unfortunate coincidence, a dramatic twist of fate. Yet as you observe the intricate physical process of communication in this printer's workshop, you realize that such miscommunications were not uncommon in Shakespeare's time. In an era before reliable postal services or instantaneous messages, delivering a letter, especially one of vital importance, was a challenging endeavor, fraught with potential for error, delay, or outright failure. Fleet Street, with its concentration of printers and scribes, was a hub of written communication, but the journey of a letter was a perilous one. A message might travel by personal messenger, often a servant or hired runner, or be entrusted to a common carrier who followed established routes between towns. These journeys were slow, vulnerable to weather, bad roads, and even highwaymen. Moreover, the recipient might have moved, or, as with Friar John, the messenger himself could be detained by unforeseen circumstances such as illness or quarantine during a plague outbreak. The very act of transmitting information was an adventure, a gamble against the unpredictable forces of the world. Shakespeare, with his keen grasp of the period's practical realities, understood this inherent fragility of communication. He didn't invent the concept of a letter gone astray. He masterfully used this very real vulnerability to amplify the tragedy. The unread words of Friar Lawrence's letter, meant to prevent disaster, become a symbol of lost opportunity, of information delayed just long enough to seal a terrible fate. The dramatic tension isn't just about the words themselves, but about the physical journey they failed to complete. As the rhythmic thunk * of the printing press fills the air, and the scent of fresh ink settles around you, you reflect on how Shakespeare transformed the common hardship, the unreliability of communication, into a powerful, heart-wrenching catalyst for his transcendent tragedy. He ensures that the misdelivered letter is not just a plot device, but a poignant reminder of how fragile human plans can be, and how even the smallest twist of fate can irrevocably alter the course of destiny, leaving you with a quiet appreciation for the printed word and the perils of its passage. You step into the hushed, solemn chamber of the Court of Wards and Liveries in 1595, a powerful institution housed within Westminster. The air is cool and still, carrying the faint, dry scent of ancient parchment, beeswax and authority. Pale sunlight struggles through tall arched windows, casting a weak diffuse glow on the stone floor and the imposing wooden benches where officials deliberate. You hear only the soft rustle of important documents, the low murmur of whispered legal counsel, and the occasional, measured scrape of a clerk's quill. This is a place where lives, particularly those of the young and orphaned, are meticulously managed, their futures decided not by sentiment, but by law and the crown's prerogative. You might think that the pressure on Juliet to marry Paris was solely a matter of her parents' will. But in Shakespeare's England, and indeed in Renaissance Italy, the control of marriages, particularly for noble heirs, was a significant political and economic concern. The court of wards and liveries was a testament to this reality. If a wealthy nobleman died, leaving an underage heir or heiress, the crown could claim their wardship. This meant the monarch had the right to control their education, their estate, and crucially their marriage, often selling these rights for considerable profit to a favored courtier. Love, in such transactions, was utterly irrelevant. Only lineage, wealth, and strategic alliance mattered. While Juliet, with her father alive, was not technically a ward of this court, her situation perfectly reflects the underlying principles at play. Lord Capulet, in his eagerness to secure a prestigious match with Paris, is acting precisely within the cultural context of the era. He sees Paris not merely as a suitor, but as an advantageous alliance, a way to elevate his family's standing and secure its future, especially after the recent turmoil. Her feelings, her desires, are secondary to the strategic demands of family honor and economic stability. The earlier Italian novellas highlighted this parental authority, presenting Juliet's defiance as a moral failing. Shakespeare, however, with his profound empathy, transformed this harsh reality from a mere plot device into a heart-wrenching conflict. He didn't invent the concept of an arranged marriage or the relentless pressure upon a young noblewoman. Instead, he made Juliet's struggle against it intensely personal and central to the tragedy. Her desperate resistance is not simply disobedience, but a fight for the very essence of true love against a system that seeks to commodify her. This profound clash between individual will and societal expectation, between passion and pragmatism, becomes a universal theme. As the quiet efficiency of the court settles around you, you reflect on how Shakespeare illuminated the impersonal, political machinery of marriage through the agonizing personal choices of Juliet. He took the historical reality of controlling estates and alliances, and through his unparalleled artistry, transformed it into a timeless tale, demonstrating the brutal cost when love is pitted against a world that values property and power above all else. You step into the profound, bone-chilling cold of a family crypt, beneath the chancel of an old London church in 1595. The air is heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, centuries-old stone, and the faint, sweet decay of time itself. A single flickering torch held by a stoic sexton casts dancing shadows that stretch and warp across the rough-hewn walls, illuminating rows of ancient, dust-laden coffins and sarcophagi. The silence here is absolute, a heavy, velvet cloak that muffles all sound from the living world above. This is a place of finality, where lineage and legacy are laid to rest, and where, in tales like that of Romeo and Juliet, love finds its tragic, eternal bed. You might think that the iconic, heartbreaking scene of Romeo and Juliet dying together in a tomb, their love conquering even death, was a dramatic crescendo conjured solely by Shakespeare's unparalleled genius. But as your breath mists in the frigid air of this crypt, you discover that the idea of the lovers meeting their end in a sepulchre was a well-established, chilling part of their story, long before Shakespeare's quill touched parchment. Both Luigi da Porto's 1524 Italian novella and Arthur Brooke's 1562 English poem, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet *, included the tomb as the setting for the tragic climax. In these earlier versions, Julieta awakens to find Romeo dead beside her, and chooses to end her own life. The tomb in these retellings was a stark, grim stage for the ultimate consequences of their forbidden love. and their defiance of parental wishes. It was a place where the moral lessons of disobedience were brought to their most explicit and brutal conclusion, a chilling endpoint for their rash actions. The focus was on the grim finality, the wages of their sin. Shakespeare, however, with his profound grasp of human emotion and his gift for transcendent poetry, transformed this grim setting into something far more. He didn't invent the tomb scene, but he infused it with an overwhelming sense of romantic pathos and cosmic inevitability. He elevated the lovers' deaths from a mere act of consequence to a powerful, almost spiritual union. You recall Romeo's despairing soliloquy in the tomb, his final words painting Juliet's resting place, not as a dark vault, but as a ye-beaten lantern of beauty, a place where he can finally find peace beside her. Juliet's discovery of Romeo's empty poison cup, and her swift, decisive act with his dagger, are not just moments of plot resolution, they are intensely personal acts of devotion, reaffirming their bond, even as life leaves them. As the torchlight flickers across the ancient stones, you sense the weight of centuries of sorrow, yet also the enduring power of love. Shakespeare ensured that the chill of the tomb becomes a solemn testament to their love's triumph over all earthly divisions. He transformed a scene of stark morality into one of sublime tragedy, making their final embrace in the crypt an immortal symbol of a love that transcends not only family hatred but death itself. You step into the quiet ancient churchyard of St. Giles without Cripplegate in 1595, a place where the dead lie thick beneath the green turf, just outside the city walls. The air is cool and damp, carrying the rich, earthy scent of freshly turned soil mingled with the faint aroma of damp stone from the old church. A sexton, his back bent with years of labor, steadily wields his spade, the rhythmic thud asterisk of metal against earth echoing softly in the stillness. Pale afternoon sunlight filters through the branches of ancient yew trees, casting dappled shadows over worn gravestones and the undisturbed plots awaiting new occupants. This is a place of final rest, where life's clamor fades, and the bitter divisions of the world are, at last, laid to sleep. You might think that the ultimate reconciliation between the Montagues and Capulets, a profound peace born from their shared unbearable grief over their children's bodies, was always the powerful definitive conclusion to the story of Romeo and Juliet. But as you watch the sexton diligently prepare a grave, you realize that while the idea of ending a feud after such a tragedy was present in earlier versions, Shakespeare's genius was in transforming its emotional weight and moral impact. We've traced this story from the actual feuding families of Verona, whose strife was noted by Dante, through the Italian novellas of Porto and Bandello, and then to Arthur Brooks' English poem. These predecessors indeed described the families, sorrow, and an eventual end to their quarrel. However, their primary focus was often on the cautionary aspect of the tale. The lovers' deaths were presented as the grim but deserved consequence of their disobedience and rash actions, a moral lesson about defying parental will and challenging social order. The reconciliation, while present, served more as a final restoration of order after chaos, a pragmatic end to the feud, rather than a moment of profound, soul-wrenching transformation. Shakespeare, however, elevated this ending into something far more transcendent. He didn't invent the reconciliation, but he made it the agonizing, hard-won culmination of the play, a piece bought at the most terrible price. His Montagues and Capulets are not simply admonished, they are shattered. Their grief is so overwhelming, so utterly devastating, that it strips away generations of hatred, leaving only shared human sorrow. You recall Lord Capulet extending his hand to Lord Montague, promising a bowing statue in pure gold, of Juliet, matched by Montague's pledge for Romeo, symbolizing not just an end to the feud, but a monumental, mournful tribute to the love that destroyed them both. As the sexton pauses, leaning on his spade, and the last of the sunlight softens the ancient stones, you sense the quiet power of this transformation. Shakespeare ensures that the glooming piece that concludes his play is not merely a restoration of order, but a poignant, earned moment of human recognition. that only through the profound suffering brought by hate can true, if bittersweet, understanding sometimes be found. He turned a cautionary tale into an eternal lament, showing that even in death, love can wield a power strong enough to break the chains of ancient grudges, leaving you with a deep, peaceful contemplation of humanity's capacity for both love and sorrow. You step into a quiet, shadowed chamber in 1595, where a weakening fire casts flickering, uncertain light. The air is cool and still, thick with the faint scent of embers and the crisp, clean aroma of freshly dyed wool. By the dim glow, a figure, perhaps a grieving mother or sister, sits bent over, her needle flashing faintly as she stitches meticulous seams into heavy black fabric. You hear only the soft, rhythmic scrape of the needle against cloth, the occasional crackle of the dying fire, and the gentle whisper of the wind outside. This is a scene of profound sorrow, an intimate tableau of loss, where the world slows, and the heavy weight of mourning settles over all. You might think that the ultimate reconciliation of the Montagues and Capulets, a profound and sorrowful peace forged in the tomb of their children, was a dramatic resolution solely born from Shakespeare's genius. But as you watch the solemn act of stitching mourning black, you discover that the idea of a family feud concluding after such devastating loss was a powerful and desired outcome in the tales that preceded Shakespeare. Even in the grittier historical reality of medieval Italy, after generations of bloodshed, there were sometimes moments where shared grief, or the intervention of a prince, could bring a temporary, or even lasting cessation to a vendetta. The earlier Italian novellas by Luigi da Porto and Matteo Bandello, and Arthur Brooks' English poem, all described the immense grief of the families after the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. They recounted how the sheer scale of the tragedy often led the feuding houses to lay down their arms and agree to a peace. In these versions, the reconciliation, while undeniably sad, served as a final moral lesson. The horrific cost of hate, the just outcome for defiance, and the ultimate restoration of social order. It was a pragmatic end to a destructive conflict, rather than a moment of profound, soul-altering transformation. Shakespeare, however, with his unparalleled understanding of human suffering and his gift for transcendent poetry, transformed this pragmatic reconciliation into something far more. He didn't invent the end of the feud, but he elevated it into the agonizing, hard-won culmination of his play, a peace bought at the most terrible price imaginable. His Montagues and Capulets are not simply admonished by their prince, they are utterly shattered, their hatred consumed by the inferno of their shared grief. You recall Lord Capulet extending his hand to Lord Montague, not just as a truce but in a profound act of mutual understanding and sorrow, agreeing to erect statues in pure gold of their children. This act symbolizes not just an end to the fighting, but a monumental, mournful tribute to the love that destroyed them both, yet ultimately united their houses. As the last embers of the fire glow faintly, casting long, peaceful shadows, you sense the quiet power of this transformation. Shakespeare ensures that the glooming peace that concludes his play is not merely a restoration of order, but a poignant, deeply human moment of recognition. Only through the profound, shared suffering brought by hate can true, albeit bittersweet, understanding sometimes be found. He transformed a cautionary tale into an eternal lament, showing that even in death, love can wield a power strong enough to break the chains of ancient grudges, leaving you with a deep, peaceful contemplation of humanity's capacity for both love and sorrow, stitched forever into the fabric of time. You step into the heavy, echoing silence of an Elizabethan house in 1595, a house perhaps once bustling, but now seemingly bereft of its heirs. The air is cool and still, thick with the scent of aged timber, dust, and a faint, lingering aroma of past life, like a forgotten perfume. Sunlight, pale and watery, struggles through tall, uncurtained windows, illuminating the moats dancing in the stillness and casting long, cold shadows across unworn floorboards. No laughter rings in these halls, no hurried footsteps, only a profound, almost oppressive quiet, a stark reminder of what is lost when a lineage ends, or a family is consumed by its own divisions. You have journeyed with me through the astonishing history of Romeo and Juliet *, peeling back the theatrical romance to uncover its grittier historical roots and its evolving literary life. We began in medieval Verona, with the actual Montecchi and Cappelletti families, whose brutal feuds Dante Alighieri himself immortalized. We traced the tale's transformation through Italian novellas by Luigi da Porto and Matteo Bandello, which gave names and narrative structure to our lovers, and then to Arthur Brooke's 1562 English poem, which provided Shakespeare with his direct blueprint. Many of the story's iconic elements, the masked ball, the secret marriage, Friar Lawrence's potion, the tomb scene, were already in place. But as you stand in this quiet, empty house, you grasp the immense chasm between the older versions and Shakespeare's enduring masterpiece. The earlier Italian tales and Brooke's poem were often darker, serving primarily as cautionary warnings. They emphasized the grim realities of family honor and vendetta, framing the lovers' deaths as a moral consequence of their youthful impulsiveness and defiance of parental wishes. Their sorrowful end was a lesson in obedience, a return to order after transgression. Shakespeare, however, performed the ultimate alchemy. He didn't invent the story's ending, but he transformed its very soul. He breathed vibrant life into characters like the witty Mercutio and the earthy nurse, making their presence and absence profoundly impactful. He compressed months into a few desperate days, intensifying the sense of inexorable fate. Most powerfully, Shakespeare transformed the narrative from a warning into a transcendent tragedy of romantic love. He infused Romeo and Juliet's passion with such overwhelming poetry and intensity that their tragic deaths become not merely a punishment, but a heart-wrenching, sublime sacrifice. In his hands, the ultimate reconciliation between the Montagues and Capulets, achieved over the bodies of their beloved heirs, is not just a pragmatic end to a feud, but a devastating testament to the ultimate cost of hatred, a peace bought at an unbearable price. As the stillness of the house settles around you, and the last of the light begins to fade, you realize that Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet asterisk remains immortal, because he elevated its raw, historical truth into a universal reflection on the human spirit. He ensured that this centuries-old story would forever speak across time, touching the deepest chords of the human heart, leaving us not with a moralizing lesson, but with a profound and timeless appreciation for love, in all its glorious, tragic power. You find yourself in the hushed, imposing chamber of the Star Chamber in Westminster in 1595. A royal court renowned for its stern justice and power. The air is cool and still, thick with the dry scent of old parchment, polished oak, and the faint metallic tang of ink. Sunlight, pale and diffuse, struggles through tall stained glass windows, casting long, solemn shadows across the patterned tiled floor. You hear only the soft rustle of heavy robes, the low murmur of whispered legal counsel, and the occasional, measured scrape of a clerk's quill as a magistrate intently considers a case of public affray, a violent disturbance of the peace. This is a place where order is fiercely maintained, where quarrels and public brawls are taken with utmost gravity. You might think that the escalating street fights between the Montagues and Capulets, those clashes that rip through Verona, are purely dramatic invention, heightened for the stage. But the truth is, public disorder stemming from personal honor and family rivalries was a very real concern for authorities in both Elizabethan England and Renaissance Italian city-states. The Star Chamber itself existed to address such issues, dealing with riots, libels and offenses that threatened civic stability, often without the need for a jury, emphasizing the Crown's absolute power to suppress disorder and enforce peace. Consider the opening scenes of Romeo and Juliet asterisk. The servants' brawl quickly escalates to involve the heads of both houses, leading to Prince Aeschylus's stern pronouncement that any further disturbance will be met with death. This reflects the very real efforts of rulers to quash private feuds, which undermined their authority and endangered their cities. Like Verona's prince, English magistrates in courts like the Star Chamber grappled with the disruptive power of vendetta, understanding that personal animosities, if left unchecked, could tear society apart. They sought to impose order through strict legal measures, often by banishment or severe fines, to prevent such bloodshed. Shakespeare, a keen observer of human nature and political power, didn't invent this struggle for order. Instead, he brilliantly made the authorities' attempts to control the feud a poignant backdrop to the lovers' tragedy. The prince's edict, meant to establish peace, directly leads to Romeo's banishment for Tybalt's death, an act that then accelerates the lovers' doom. The very forces designed to protect the city inadvertently become instruments of their destruction, unable to stem the tide of human passion and ingrained hatred. As the magistrate nods, a decision quietly made, and the soft rustle of papers resumes, you reflect on this enduring conflict. Shakespeare took the raw reality of authorities striving to impose peace on a violent world, and through his art, transformed it. He ensured that the solemn business of justice, like the passion of love and the fury of hate, plays its indelible part in a tragedy that resonates across centuries, reminding us that the human heart, for all its complexities, remains fiercely resistant to simple governance. You step into the hushed, dusty confines of a herald's office in 1595 London, a place dedicated to the meticulous recording and display of lineage and honor. The air is dry and cool, carrying the faint, crisp scent of aged parchment, old leather, and a pervasive undisturbed dust. Sunlight, pale and diffuse, struggles through a high, grimy window, illuminating motes dancing in the stillness. Your gaze falls upon the walls, lined with painted shields, each bearing a unique, intricately designed coat of arms, a symbolic display of a noble family's identity, its history, and its proud standing. You hear only the soft rustle of a clerk's sleeve, the occasional dry cough, and the distant, muffled sounds of the city beyond, all serving to amplify the profound silence in this chamber dedicated to ancestral pride. You might think that the fierce, unwavering loyalty to family name, the very foundation of the Montague and Capulet feud, was a dramatic device unique to Shakespeare's stage. But in truth, the deep significance of a family's coat of arms, its lineage and its honor, was paramount in Renaissance society, both in England and even more so in the aristocratic culture of medieval Italy. A family's heraldic device was more than just a painting. It was a visible declaration of power, status, and collective identity, representing generations of ancestors and the reputation they had built. A slight against that honor, or a challenge to that coat of arms, was an insult to the entire bloodline, demanding immediate and often violent retribution. Consider the Montagues and Cappelletti, the real feuding houses of Verona. Their bitter rivalry, which Dante noted, was deeply entwined with this very concept of family honor. Their names, their symbols, were not just markers of identity, they were banners under which men would fight, bleed, and die. The earlier Italian novellas by Luigi da Porto and Matteo Bandello, and Arthur Brooks' poem, all underscored this pervasive sense of familial pride and the vendetta culture it fueled. They painted a picture where the ancient grudge was not just between individuals, but between two entire proud houses, each with its own history and symbols of distinction. Shakespeare, however, took this deep-seated historical reality and transformed it into the very engine of his tragedy. He didn't invent the concept of rival houses or the power of their symbols, but he made it intensely personal. He opens his play with servants brawling over biting their thumb, a simple yet profound insult to family honor, escalating instantly into a deadly street fight. He then crafts Mercutio's famous dying curse, a plague o' both your houses, a testament to the all-consuming destructive power of this inherited hatred, forcing the audience to grapple with the senselessness of a feud sustained by pride and ancient symbols. As you step back into the London light, leaving the dusty office and its silent coats of arms behind, you reflect on this transformation. Shakespeare ensures that the static symbols of rival houses become living, breathing forces in his play, showing that while honor may be enshrined on a wall, it is also a volatile, destructive passion in the hearts of men. He ensures that the tale of Romeo and Juliet forever reminds us of the profound human cost when love is sacrificed on the altar of entrenched hatred and family pride, making their story a timeless and deeply resonant masterpiece. You step onto the frost-covered fields just outside Stratford-upon-Avon, in the crisp, early morning of 1595. The air bites with a clean, sharp chill, making your breath plume in white clouds. Beneath your worn boots, the frozen blades of grass crunch softly, a quiet, rhythmic sound that accompanies your every step. The landscape is hushed, a mosaic of muted browns and whites, under a pale, wintry sky, with the bare skeletal branches of distant trees etched against the horizon. A faint scent of damp earth and wood smoke, carried on the still air from a faraway farmhouse chimney, grounds you deeply in this quiet rural world, the very landscape that shaped the young William Shakespeare. You might have long held the belief that the tale of Romeo and Juliet *, with its passionate verse and heart-wrenching climax, sprang entirely, uniquely, from the mind of this very playwright, perhaps, as he walked these contemplative paths. But tonight our journey through time has revealed a deeper, older truth. The tragic narrative of star-crossed lovers existed for centuries before Shakespeare, a story that journeyed across continents and through diverse literary forms before reaching his extraordinary hands. We've traveled from the brutal, factionalized Verona of the 13th and 14th centuries, where the actual Montecchi and Cappelletti families waged their deadly feuds, a historical reality even Dante Alighieri deemed worthy of mention in his Purgatorio. You've seen how Italian writers like Luigi da Porto in 1524 and Matteo Bandello in 1554 gave the lovers their names and expanded their tragic narrative. And how Arthur Brooke's 1562 English poem, The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet *, became Shakespeare's direct literary ancestor, providing the skeletal structure of the plot you know so well, the secret marriage, the potion, the tomb, and their ultimate sorrowful end. Yet as you walk through these serene frost-kissed fields, reflecting on these layers of history and literature, you realize the profound distinction of Shakespeare's genius. The earlier versions, while poignant, were largely cautionary tales, steeped in the moralistic cultural context of their time. They emphasized the grim consequences of youthful disobedience, of defying parental authority, and of the perils of clandestine love in a world where arranged marriages were social imperatives. The lovers' deaths, in these retellings, served as a stark lesson, a warning to their audiences. But Shakespeare, in his singular artistry, transformed this didactic material into something transcendent. He didn't diminish the historical truth or the literary inheritance. Rather, he absorbed it all, making it the rich soil from which his masterpiece would grow. He took the established elements and infused them with a breathtaking, universal poetry, elevating the story from a mere warning to an immortal tragedy of romantic love. He crafted unforgettable, vibrant characters like Mercutio and the nurse, giving the play humor, warmth, and profound human complexity that resonated deeply with the groundlings and gentry alike. As the sun begins its slow ascent, its pale light glinting on the icy fields, you feel a deep appreciation for this journey. Shakespeare's transformation was not just literary, it was alchemical, turning raw facts and moralizing fables into an enduring exploration of love, hate, and destiny, a story that continues to speak across centuries. You draw closer to the warmth of a crackling fire in a humble Elizabethan home in 1595. Outside, the winter night presses in, cold and still, but here, the air is thick, with the comforting scent of wood smoke, and the faint aroma of hot spiced ale. Flames dance merrily in the hearth, casting long, shifting shadows on the stone walls and the rough-hewn timbers of the ceiling. You hear the cheerful pops and hisses of the burning logs, a soothing ancient sound, and perhaps the low hum of a distant carol from the street, muted by the thick walls. This is where stories are told, passed down through generations, made vivid and alive in the glowing heart of a long winter's night. You might have thought you knew the story of Romeo and Juliet intimately, a tale sprung fully formed from Shakespeare's own singular genius. But tonight, gathered by this warm hearth, we have journeyed through centuries to peel back the layers of that familiar tragedy, revealing its astonishingly deep roots in history and literature. Our investigative path led us first to the brutal, factionalized Verona of the 13th and 14th centuries, where the actual Montecchi and Cappelletti families waged their deadly feuds, a historical reality so infamous that Dante Alighieri himself, immortalized their strife in his Purgatorio. From this bedrock of real-world violence, the story began its literary evolution. You discovered how Italian writers like Luigi da Porto, in 1524, first gave our lovers their familiar names, Romeo and Julieta, in his novella, Historia Novellamente Ritrovata. Then, Matteo Bandello, in 1554, expanded the narrative, adding many dramatic elements you now recognize. Arthur Brooks' 1562 English poem, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet became Shakespeare's most direct literary ancestor, providing the clear blueprint for much of the plot. The masked ball, the secret marriage, Friar Lawrence's potion, the desperate tomb scene, and their ultimate sorrowful end. Many iconic elements, like the balcony scene, were present in these versions decades before Shakespeare. Yet, as the fire crackles softly, you now understand what makes Shakespeare's version truly definitive. The earlier Italian tales and even Brooks' poem were often darker, steeped in the moralistic cultural context of their time. They serve primarily as cautionary warnings against youthful impetuousness and the perils of defying parents and social conventions. The lovers' deaths, in these retellings, were frequently presented as a stark albeit grim lesson. Shakespeare, however, in his unparalleled artistry, transformed this didactic material. He didn't diminish the historical truth or the literary inheritance. Rather, he absorbed it all, making it the rich foundation for his masterpiece. He infused the tale with breathtaking, universal poetry, elevating it from a mere warning to an immortal tragedy of romantic love. He crafted unforgettable, vibrant characters like the witty Mercutio, whose death irrevocably plunges the play into tragedy, and the earthy, devoted nurse, who gives Juliet a deeply human confidant. He masterfully compressed the timeline from months to just a few intense, desperate days, heightening the sense of inescapable fate. Most profoundly, Shakespeare shifted the story's very heart, making Romeo and Juliet's passion the central, most powerful force. Their devotion becomes so overwhelming that their deaths are not merely a punishment, but a heart-wrenching sacrifice, an enduring testament to love's beauty and its devastating vulnerability in a world consumed by hate. As the glowing embers settle, casting a final warm light, you realize Shakespeare's transformation was alchemical. He took the iron of history and the existing literary fire and forged a narrative that speaks across centuries, touching the deepest chords of the human heart.